a young man named Azuma Shuri appears, expressing a need to explain his current, troubling situation. He recounts waking up to find himself surrounded by 8 individuals who identified themselves as a mercenary group. The narrative then flashes back, opening on a shot of a well-organized kitchen, with pots and pans neatly stored on shelves. A pair of hands is shown expertly dicing ingredients with a large kitchen knife on a cutting board. Those ingredients are then combined with noodles in a skillet, tossed together over a hot stove. A younger, cheerful Azuma works in a diner, explaining that his family owns it in the Hartanaka region of Hiroshima and that he's being called to serve a table. While stirring large pots, he states plainly that he loves to cook. His passion was driven by a long-held desire to take over his father's diner after high school, a goal that led him to start preparing his own bento lunches back in elementary school. His father, shown as a silhouette, had told him that to work in the diner, he first needed to master the basics of using knives and pots by making his own meals. His initial attempts were disastrous, resulting in inedible food that he forced himself to eat, causing him to lose 2 kilograms. Too embarrassed by his constant failures to ask his father for help, he followed his friend's advice and began imitating recipes from a cookbook. His skills improved, showcased by a delicious-looking bento, and he successfully gained back the weight he had lost. The process gradually became fun, and he expanded his repertoire to include Japanese, Western, and Chinese cuisine, as well as simple desserts, eventually taking over all the cooking for his family by the time he was in high school. Throughout his school days, his resolve to work at his father's diner after graduation only became stronger. His father affirmed this path, stating that upon graduation, he would begin teaching Azuma the fundamentals of the craft. Being the owner's son afforded him no special treatment. His days began at 5 in the morning for ingredient prep and ended at 10 at night with dishwashing, with no allowance given. He was taught every aspect of being a chef, from the menial tasks of cleaning to the complex art of cooking. However, on the day of his high school graduation, his father subverted all expectations by telling him to go train outside, having already arranged an apprenticeship for him in Tokyo. A stunned Azuma listened as his father explained that he had taught him all he could, and that new experiences awaited him in the city. With the room, contract, and all necessary paperwork already finalized by his father, Azuma had no right to refuse and was sent away to Tokyo. At 18 years old, in the spring, his formal training in the capital began. His life became a grueling cycle of working from dawn until late at night 6 days a week, spending his only day off and all his money visiting famous restaurants to refine his palate. He never found the demanding schedule to be too difficult, as his genuine love for cooking sustained him through the grind. After 2 years of dedicated work, his master in Tokyo declared that he had nothing more to teach him. And so, in the spring when he turned 20, he was finally set to return home to Hiroshima to begin working at his father's diner. He stood on the platform waiting for the bullet train, thinking that up until that very moment, his life had proceeded as planned. The plan was to take the Shinkansen home, but the moment he stepped towards the train, his path diverged unexpectedly. He took his first step to board, but his foot slipped and he suddenly fell forward into a state of confusion. His vision was consumed by darkness as he felt himself falling at an ever-increasing speed until he lost consciousness. An image captures his lone figure plummeting through an endless black void. When he awoke, his first thought was to question where he was, realizing this marked the beginning of his new life as Azuma Shuri. A blond man clad in armor looked down upon him, noting that he was awake. Still lying down, Azuma's drowsy mind questioned the man's strange clothing. He wondered if the armor was some kind of cosplay or merely a prop for a play. The armored man informed him that he had been found lying unconscious and without any belongings in the camp of a group that he commanded. The words camp and command didn't register properly, and the man asked if he could remember anything at all. Azuma clutched his head in pain, unable to make sense of the situation or process the disjointed words. When he asked where he was, the man identified the location as the hilly region of Linbel, again pressing him about his memory. Azuma had never heard of Linbel and apologized, asking what kind of region it was. The man, now confused himself, explained that Linbel is in the western part of the Sobralyu continent and asked what Azuma meant by what region. Azuma was baffled that the word region seemed untranslatable and wondered if the man spoke Japanese and was perhaps a foreigner who had returned home. Their conversation was interrupted by a voice calling for the captain, announcing that the lost child had awakened, and the captain permitted them to enter. A group of imposing, battle-ready individuals filed into the tent behind their captain. Azuma nervously wondered if the intimidating newcomers were friendly. His mind raced to rationalize the scene, speculating again that it must be cosplay for a play, noting that they were an unusually good-looking group, perhaps even idols. He stared at the varied group, his eyes drawn to a large warrior in a horned helmet and two women with sharp expressions. His gaze fell upon the massive battle axe held by the horned warrior, an axe taller than himself, and a horrifying thought crossed his mind, that it might be real. The captain, referring to him as Lost Child, asked for his name, and he introduced himself as Azuma Shuri. The captain in turn gave his name as Gangrav and identified himself as the leader of the mercenary group stationed there. Azuma's confusion only deepened as he wondered what a mercenary group was and if it was the name of their supposed idol group. One of Gangrav's companions whispered a suggestion that Azuma might have hit his head, while Gangrav, understanding the disconnect, prepared to explain the situation. Gangrav recounted how Azuma had suddenly appeared at their encampment before collapsing on the spot. He continued, explaining that Azuma seemed to have wandered in a daze until he was completely exhausted, asking if any of this was familiar. Surrounded by the watchful mercenaries, Azuma could only state that his memory began with him waking up in this place. Gangrav's eyes narrowed as he pressed for more information, asking where Azuma had come from. When Azuma replied that he was from Japan, Gangrav was unfamiliar with the name and asked where such a place was located. Azuma was taken aback, explaining that Japan is an island country, which prompted another mercenary to ask if he had come from beyond the continent. Gangrav cut the speculation short, stating firmly that this was the Ryouriban Hills, not Japan, and that it was best to stop trying to make sense of it. The reality of his situation crashed down on Azuma as he realized he was in a place called the Sabreu continent, a land that did not exist in his world. Gangrav noticed his distress and told him not to push himself, reminding him he had been found in a poor state and needed more rest. As another mercenary cheerfully mentioned having cleaned him up, Gangrav got back to the point, stating once more that they are a mercenary group. He then revealed the critical nature of their situation. They were in the middle of a war, and he hoped Azuma understood the implications of that fact. An unknown person appearing in a military camp during wartime is a serious problem, and Gangrav explained that keeping him there was not a good idea. A sense of dread washed over Azuma as he began to grasp the true danger of his predicament. He realized that in this context he could very well be suspected of being an enemy spy. His fear intensified as his eyes darted towards the menacing axe of the nearby warrior. Gangrav clarified, however, that they couldn't act recklessly on the off chance Azuma was just a confused local villager, as harming him could create enemies of nearby settlements. He admitted he didn't really believe Azuma was a spy, but for the safety of his people he needed him to answer every question with complete honesty. If Azuma could do that, Gangrav promised to consider ensuring his safe return to his hometown. Thrown into a situation far beyond his control, Azuma agreed, swearing he would not lie. He once again stated his name, age, and origin: Azuma Shuri, 20 years old, from Hiroshima Prefecture. Gangrav immediately accused him of lying, having never heard of Hiroshima, and pointing out that Azuma's youthful face made him look more like a teen than a 20-year-old. Azuma desperately insisted he was telling the truth about being from Japan, but he had no explanation for how he arrived here. Gangrav considered this, asking if Azuma was claiming to be an outsider, or what they might call a foreigner. The other mercenaries, including the large man with the axe and a stern-looking woman, listened intently. 3 more female members of the group watched him with wary, suspicious expressions. Azuma conceded that it was impossible for them to understand when he couldn't explain it himself, which Gangrav agreed made sense. As Azuma continued to plead that he was telling the truth, Gangrav calmly told him to stop and prepare to tell the real truth this time. He reassured the frightened Azuma that he wasn't going to be harmed and that the tough questioning was just a tactic. Gangrav then mused aloud about what to do, acknowledging that Azuma's memory confusion wasn't clearing up and that they lacked the resources to care for someone who couldn't contribute. Azuma fell into a worried silence, understanding his fate hung in the balance. He hesitantly asked if he could work, and Gangrav confirmed that if he could make himself useful, even with odd jobs, they could consider letting him stay. Otherwise, the only option was to provide him with some food and supplies and send him to a nearby village for shelter. Gangrav apologized but was firm, stating that in the middle of a war, they could not afford to keep a useless person in their ranks. Seeing the serious look in Gangrav's eyes, Azuma became convinced that they were truly at war. He quickly realized that leaving the camp was a terrible idea. No village embroiled in conflict would have the luxury to take in a mysterious stranger. Knowing he possessed skills that could be useful, Azuma decided it was far better to seek protection among these mercenaries than to venture out alone. He knows that his only chance for survival is to prove his worth to these people. Gangrav, surprised by his calm demeanor, agrees to let him work under supervision, a term Azuma readily accepts. The mercenary leader then questions what kind of work a boy like him could possibly do, a sentiment echoed by the curious looks of his companions. Azuma, however, has already formulated a plan based on his unique circumstances. He understands that leaving the relative safety of the armed group would likely result in his death amidst the ongoing war. It would be a fatal error to abandon such a powerful group, so he concludes that his only path forward is to secure a role and ensure his survival among them. Despite this resolve, the immense pressure of his situation makes it difficult to organize his thoughts and decide on a course of action. Then, a sudden realization cuts through his anxiety, providing him with a clear path. He rises and declares to the assembled mercenaries that he wants to cook for them. Gangrav is completely taken aback, his expression a mixture of shock and disbelief at the unexpected offer. Demanding clarification, Gangrav asks what he just said, and Azuma calmly repeats his desire to cook. Gangrav presses further, asking if he actually knows how to cook, to which Azuma confidently replies that he has trained extensively. The captain's surprise quickly morphs into pure excitement as he pumps his fist in the air, leaving Azuma utterly bewildered by the reaction. He then notices that the other mercenaries share their leader's enthusiasm, though the reason for their excitement remains a mystery to him. Beaming, Gangrav announces that he has the perfect job for him. Azuma will be the new cook for the mercenary group. Azuma voices a polite concern about displacing their current cook, but Gangrav dismisses it, saying it would be faster to simply show him the situation. He is then led out of the tent and through the sprawling military camp, a bustling scene of soldiers, supplies, and campfires. The sight of the armed men and makeshift shelters solidifies the reality in his mind. This is a genuine battlefield encampment. As they move past rows of tents and tethered horses, the truth becomes undeniable. He observes the unnaturally colorful hair of the people around him, the final piece of evidence convincing him that he has somehow ended up in another world entirely. They finally arrive at the camp's kitchen, a crude outdoor setup with large pots hanging over a simple fire pit. It is here that Gangrav reveals the truth. Their mercenary group does not have a designated cook. He admits it was a major oversight, but his attempts to hire a professional were fruitless, as no chef was willing to work on a dangerous battlefield. Given that a town or tavern offers far greater safety, Azuma understands he has no other choice but to rely on these mercenaries for now. In the absence of a cook, the mercenaries have been taking turns with the cooking, but Gangrav confesses that their culinary efforts are barely edible. The situation is critical because they are about to head into a major battle and desperately need a good meal to boost morale, yet many of their members have never cooked before. Gangrav then issues a challenge. If Azuma can prepare a meal that he personally declares to be delicious, the job of camp cook is his. With a confident smile, Azuma accepts the test without hesitation. He immediately sets to work, surveying the limited supplies to determine what kind of dish he can create. The available ingredients are sparse and basic: onions, carrots, potatoes, flour, butter, milk, cheese, and seasonings, along with a knife, a pot, and a ladle. When Azuma asks if this is all they have, Gangrav confirms that 3 months of war have left their food supplies critically low, and they intend to settle the current battle by the next day. He adds that the soldier assigned to cook today had already given up, declaring it impossible to make anything substantial with what was left. Now, the responsibility falls to Azuma to succeed where others have failed, with the fate of the camp's morale resting on his skills. Azuma feels the immense weight of the task he has been entrusted with, a trial that will determine his future with the group. While he contemplates, Gangrav asks what he plans to make, reminding him that all the bread and preserved foods have already been consumed. After a moment of consideration, Azuma confidently announces his intention to make cream stew, a dish that leaves Gangrav completely confused. Azuma asks if Gangrav is unfamiliar with the dish, beginning to grasp the cultural differences of this new world. He describes it as a stew or soup made with milk and reflects on the strangeness of their ability to communicate perfectly despite such fundamental gaps in knowledge. The fact that ingredient names and the language itself are perfectly understood only makes his displacement more confusing. Deciding to put aside his bewilderment, he picks up a knife, determined to let his cooking provide the answers. Though the tools are shaped differently from what he is used to, he finds them perfectly usable and announces that he will now begin preparing the cream stew. Lacking key ingredients like consommé or soy sauce, He resolves to create a version that can be made without them. He begins by dicing the vegetables into uniform cubes for even cooking, then sautés a larger portion of onions in butter to build a rich flavor base. Once the onions have softened, he proceeds to add the remaining vegetables to the large pot. Gangrav questions his method of adding vegetables in a specific order, a practice unfamiliar to him. Azuma explains that since different vegetables have unique properties and cooking times, adding them in the correct sequence is essential for melding the flavors properly. After thoroughly sautéing the vegetables, he stirs in flour, then removes the pot from the fire to gradually incorporate the milk. Gangrav watches with alarm, protesting that the resulting soup is far too white for his liking, but Azuma calmly states that a cream stew is supposed to be white. He finishes the dish by seasoning it with salt and pepper and adding sliced cheese, while Gangrav continues to watch with deep skepticism. With the final ingredient added, Azuma proudly presents the finished cream stew, inviting the captain to eat. Gangrav remains hesitant, remarking on the stew's unnatural whiteness, but Azuma simply reiterates that this is the defining characteristic of a cream stew. The captain complains further, comparing it to a sweet dessert for nobility, until Azuma's patience wears thin. He takes a spoonful and decisively pushes it towards Gangrav's mouth, insisting that he just taste it. Watched by the entire mercenary company, Gangrav reluctantly takes the first bite, his expression guarded. An instant later, his eyes fly open in utter astonishment as the flavor registers. He immediately grabs the bowl and begins to eat with feverish intensity, his earlier skepticism completely forgotten. The other mercenaries watch in stunned silence as their captain devours the meal. Their faces are a mask of disbelief as Gangrav continues to eat without pause. The captain's furious eating captivates the attention of everyone in the vicinity. The entire camp seems to hold its breath, watching the spectacle unfold. A look of pure, unadulterated bliss spreads across Gangrav's face as he savors every spoonful. The surrounding soldiers can only stare, their mouths agape in shock and envy. In what seems like an instant, the bowl is completely empty. Azuma cautiously approaches and asks for his verdict. Gangrav thrusts the empty bowl forward, his eyes wide with excitement, and loudly demands a refill. A relieved Azuma complies, ladling another serving into the captain's bowl. Another soldier tries a bowl, admitting that while the stew's white color made him hesitate, the taste is extraordinary. He takes a slow, deliberate bite to confirm his initial impression. He marvels at how the flavor of the milk permeates the dish without any of the usual unpleasant milky smell. Leaning back with a sigh of deep satisfaction, he too finishes his bowl. He then joins his captain in enthusiastically demanding another serving. Azuma is about to oblige when he gently reminds Gangrav about the test he was supposed to be undergoing. Snapped out of his food-induced frenzy, Gangrav sheepishly apologizes for getting carried away. He then beams at Azuma and declares that he has passed with flying colors, calling the dish truly remarkable. Gangrav expresses his profound gratitude, overjoyed to finally have a proper meal after such a long time. Overwhelmed with relief, Azuma lets out a deep sigh, his place among the mercenaries now secure. The captain continues to praise the dish, noting that even without meat, the vegetables are so flavorful that he doesn't miss it at all. Azuma advises him that a balanced diet requires vegetables, not just meat, for proper nutrition, prompting Gangrav to ask what nutrients are. Surprised by the question, Azuma quickly adapts, realizing it's another fundamental concept unknown in this world. He gives a simple explanation, describing nutrients as essential fuel for keeping the body healthy. This piece of knowledge shocks Gangrav, who immediately asks if Azuma is a doctor. The question catches Azuma completely off guard. He clarifies that he is no doctor and cannot treat injuries, only promote health through food, leading Gangrav to conclude he must not be a state-sponsored physician of any kind. Gangrav suddenly grabs Azuma by the shoulders, his expression intense. He looks Azuma directly in the eyes and formally asks him again to work for the mercenary group. He then turns to the entire camp and makes a grand announcement. Shuri is officially hired as their chef, tasked with restoring their energy and filling their bellies for the coming battle. A thunderous roar of approval erupts from the assembled soldiers, who raise their fists in a unified cheer. Gangrav claps a friendly hand on Azuma's shoulder, welcoming him to the group and looking forward to their future together. As Gangrav asks Azuma to take good care of them, the young chef understands that his new life has truly begun. Shuri and Gangrav stand together in the camp's cooking area, a moment of quiet understanding passing between them. The scene then transitions to a bleak, sword-strewn battlefield, establishing the setting as a turbulent period known as the Warring States era. A flashback begins, showing an army of armored knights on the march, their commanders shouting that the land they are invading rightfully belongs to them. The defending army prepares for the onslaught, its leaders urging the soldiers to stand firm and send the wicked invaders to their graves. The narrator explains that this is the continent of Sabureu, a land where warlords are locked in a constant struggle for supremacy and battles erupt everywhere. Ambitious lords, each seeking to become the supreme ruler of the continent, fuel the endless cycle of conflict. On these battlefields, the clash of swords and spears is a daily sound, accompanied by the flight of arrows and the carnage wrought by magic and sorcery. In this brutal age, the value of human life is forgotten as people fight, steal, and kill one another in the relentless pursuit of wealth and fame. It is this very state of perpetual war that allows the mercenary business to thrive. The focus then shifts to a younger Gangrav, his backstory beginning with a violent punch delivered in a back alley brawl. He was part of a street gang, fighting with rivals over territory in a lawless town. His gang violently expels their rivals, warning them never to return. The narrator is revealed to be Gangrav, who explains that in his youth, he led this gang. He and his childhood friends engaged in all manner of criminal activity, stopping short only of murder and arson, with their success often aided by his unique talent. This talent is shown in a montage of him practicing with a sword, his movements precise and deadly. He is shown defeating an armored man with ease, his skill far beyond that of a common brawler. His swordsmanship is swift and powerful, felling his opponent in a single, decisive sequence. The defeated man is astonished, recognizing Gangrav's technique as that of a knight and questioning how a young thug could possess such skill, to which Gangrav simply replies that he learned by watching. His special talent is a perfect memory. He can see or hear something once and remember it forever, allowing him to absorb everything from academics to the complex arts of war. As the times became more dangerous, he sensed the limits of a simple street gang and realized they needed to change to survive. Confident in the abilities of his 7 core members, he led them out of the town to form a mercenary group. The group was successful initially, but as their numbers swelled to nearly 100, new problems began to surface. These were logistical problems. The costs of wages, equipment, food supplies, and horse feed began to mount. At first, Gangrav admits he didn't grasp the importance of these details, failing to understand that a mercenary group is a machine that constantly consumes money. One of the most significant issues was the terrible quality of the food, which slowly but surely began to erode the morale of the entire group. After weeks of enduring rough battlefield rations, his men would return to town and spend all their earnings on lavish feasts and drinks. This reckless spending spiraled into a larger crisis, leaving the mercenary group without the funds to properly equip themselves with new gear and exacerbating their financial shortages. He reflects on his predicament at the time, needing skilled people like a cook but lacking the means to find or hire them, all while trying to maintain his composure on the battlefield. Though the challenges of managing the mercenary group were so difficult he often felt like giving up, he was desperately determined to keep it alive. For him, leading the group was never just about earning a living or surviving the harsh world. He harbored a much grander ambition, looking out over a city and wanting to build his own country. As a war orphan who grew up on the streets, he was forced to turn to crime to survive. He began to question the path he was on, wondering if he had to resort to evil deeds in order to change the world for the better. His ultimate goal was to seize wealth from those who monopolized it and use it to help the common people, bringing an end to the miserable era of war. This purpose drove him to fight relentlessly on the battlefield, where he killed countless enemies in pursuit of his dream. His journey was not without hardship. He faced humiliating defeats and painful losses along the way. Yet despite the setbacks, he refused to break or give up, continuing his fight tirelessly. 8 years after the group's formation, however, their growth had stagnated at 100 members, and Gangrav grew anxious about their future. He had hit a wall, experiencing moments of deep despair where it seemed impossible to advance any further with his own abilities. It was at this lowest point that he had a fateful encounter that would change everything. He met the strange man who would alter his destiny, Youheidan. The narrative snaps back to the present day, at the Gangrav Mercenary Corps' encampment in the Ryouriban hills. Gangrav is in a war council with his chief officers, stretching as he asks for their assessment of the current situation. He admits his own miscalculation, having thought their current contract would be an easy source of income, only to be proven completely wrong. One officer reports they have been bogged down in a draining war of attrition for 3 months, while another expresses her surprise at how difficult the campaign has become. The protracted conflict is causing heavy losses and financial strain, threatening the very existence of the mercenary group if it results in a defeat. Gangrav points to their position on a map of the Hiratsuka Hills, noting that the open terrain severely limits their tactical options, leaving a direct, head-on assault as their only real choice. An officer named Kagaya reports that her intelligence indicates the enemy is planning a full-scale mobilization for the following morning. As the commander of both the intelligence and security units, Kagaya advises that continuing to be tied down here is a poor strategy and that they should withdraw. She argues that without a viable strategy to win, staying to fight would only result in more needless casualties. Gangrav acknowledges her concerns, agreeing that it might be wiser to retreat and move to the next battlefield while they still have strength remaining. His consideration is cut short as a massive fist slams down onto the strategy map on the table. The fist belongs to the imposing, silent warrior Ultros, commander of the 2nd Infantry and the Punishment Unit. Gangrav calmly asks the helmeted giant if he has something he wishes to say. He reflects on Ultros's nature. The warrior does not speak, instead communicating his intentions through his powerful actions. Gangrav knows that Ultros is a man who would endure any hardship for his comrades, and he can see the message in his eyes. Retreating now would be an insult to those who have already died. He understands the fierce internal conflict his loyal subordinate is experiencing. But another officer, the Magic Division Captain Aureus, interjects, warning that if they continue on their current course, the mercenary group will not be able to sustain itself. Aureus addresses Ultros's unspoken argument, acknowledging his desire to honor their fallen comrades because he values them above all else. However, she firmly states that there is a difference between pride and recklessness, and as an independent combat unit, they have the freedom to choose their battles. She points out that their employer cannot stop them from withdrawing if they choose to do so, a point Gangrav concedes is valid. While their employer, the lord who hired them, would be displeased, he would likely permit their withdrawal from a battle that has dragged on for far too long. Gangrav closes his eyes, weighing the logical arguments for retreat. But his conviction wins out, and he declares that he refuses to retreat, vowing to see the battle through to the end. He reminds his officers that their mercenary group values strength above all else, and to retreat now would damage their reputation and cause them to lose followers. If a reputation for weakness spreads, it would severely impact their ability to secure future contracts and operate effectively. His commanders fall silent, absorbing his resolute decision. Kagaya and Aureus are the first to respond, stating that as he is the leader, they have no objections to his command, and Ultros gives a silent nod of agreement. Gangrav accepts their loyalty with a faint, confident smile. Having made his decision, he tables the discussion of specific strategy, declaring that they will think about it after they have eaten. The scene cuts to the meal being served, a dark, unappetizing stew that Gangrav immediately recognizes as a problem. Aureus looks away in shame, apologizing and admitting that there are no skilled cooks within her squad. Gangrav assures her he isn't blaming her for the poor quality of the food. Still, he runs a hand through his hair in frustration, acknowledging that the lack of a decent cook has become a serious, mission-critical issue. He laments his failure to realize what a significant disadvantage this would be, with no one in the entire company capable of making delicious food. On the battlefield, simple pleasures like gambling and meals are all soldiers have for entertainment, and when the food is terrible, it saps their fighting spirit and weakens their performance. He curses his past self for dismissing cooks as salary thieves, and failing to hire one when he had the chance, realizing with regret that it's now too late to recruit anyone. His moment of frustrated self-reflection is interrupted by a subordinate urgently calling his name. Captain, a man with braided hair bursts into the war council tent, frantically looking for his captain. He is Teg, the commander of the archery unit. Gangrav confronts him angrily, demanding to know why he skipped the strategy meeting and what he was doing instead. Teg waves off the reprimand, insisting it's not important and that Gangrav and the other officers must come with him immediately to see something. Confused, Gangrav and his command staff follow Teg outside, where he vaguely mentions the situation involves a lost kid. Annoyed, Gangrav asks if a lost kid is really the reason he was summoned, but Teg struggles to explain, only able to say that the situation is strange. Gangrav's gaze shifts to a group of his other officers loitering near a tent, none of whom had attended the meeting either. With his arms crossed in exasperation, he notes how they all ignore important meetings yet flock to see a simple lost kid. The 1st Infantry Unit commander, Kuga, replies with a sly smile that a lost kid appearing on a battlefield is an event worth being curious about. Lil, the commander of the magic engineer unit, chimes in, agreeing that she is also curious about the situation. Asajai, captain of the special operations unit, adds that she has no intention of missing this either, as she is quite interested in anyone who manages to wander this far out. Gangrav sighs internally, lamenting that these exceptionally talented individuals are all problem children who can't seem to work together as a team. Resigning himself to the interruption, he decides he will see this so-called lost child for himself. He enters the designated tent and stops short, surprised by the sight of Shuri lying on a cot. The young man appears to be sleeping soundly and peacefully. Gangrav strokes his chin, observing the boy and concluding that this is indeed a difficult situation to judge. The rest of the officers crowd into the tent behind him, eager to get a look at the mysterious newcomer. Asajai peers over Gangrav's shoulder with a curious smile, prompting Gangrav to ask her if the boy is truly as strange as Teg claimed. Kagaya turns to Teg and asks where the boy appeared from, to which the archer replies that his explanation will be hard to believe. He then reveals what his subordinates witnessed. Shuri had apparently materialized out of thin air right in front of them. This incredible claim leaves Gangrav and his entire command staff speechless with shock. Gangrav wonders if this could be the legendary, wise man magic of transference, but Aureus, the magic expert, immediately declares it impossible, as that ancient magic is believed to be lost to time. If a magical genius like Aureus is so certain, Gangrav reasons, then the unbelievable story of Shuri's appearance must be true, leaving him to puzzle over how it could have happened. Asajai observes Shuri's features and remarks that he bears a striking resemblance to the people of her homeland, which she finds highly unusual. Gangrav's interest is piqued as Asajai explains she hails from the eastern region, and that her people are different from regular humans. When pressed to explain, she says that the people of her homeland are, in a word, denser than she is. The strange term, dense, hangs in the air, leaving Gangrav to ponder its meaning. The officers begin to speculate on Shuri's origins. Aureus suggests he's just a common villager, while Teg points out his lack of calluses, and Asajai theorizes his smooth skin could mean he's a wealthy merchant's son. Kagaya agrees a refined upbringing is possible but notes she never saw anyone like him at the temple, while Kuga wonders about royalty, and Lil states that no merchant she knows deals in such strange clothing. Gangrav listens to the conflicting theories and concludes that there is no simple answer to the mystery of Shuri's identity. He finds the boy to be a complete enigma. Though his body seems ordinary, he is clearly not a laborer, and his overall appearance is anything but normal. His clothes, a simple white shirt and indigo pants, seem mundane at first glance, but are far from it. Upon closer inspection, Gangrav realizes the garments are crafted with a level of technology that is utterly astonishing and far beyond the capabilities of any known modern methods. The craftsmanship is flawless, with impeccable stitching and no buttons or a traditional collar on the shirt, making its construction a complete puzzle. He examines the fabric itself, a material he has never seen before that is both beautiful and remarkably durable, with a faint sheen. The shirt alone, he thinks, is a marvel that could revolutionize fashion across the continent and make a fortune for any guild that could reproduce it. His attention then shifts to the pants, which he believes are even more valuable. He observes the intricate, calculated pattern of the indigo dye and the perfectly placed pockets that blend functionality with design in an exceptionally efficient structure. Gangrav is left in awe, concluding that Shuri's outfit is a treasure, a single piece of clothing that seems to contain the crystallized wisdom and technology of a future hundreds of years away. Kuga remarks that the boy feels as if he's from a different reality, and Gangrav agrees, wondering just how different Shuri's world truly is. Looking down at the cause of all this confusion, Gangrav realizes he has stumbled into an incredibly troublesome situation. His only consolation is that the boy appears to be a simple, bumbling idiot rather than a spy or a trained intelligence agent. Gangrav then gets the opinions of his other officers, starting with Altros, who communicates that the boy's complexion improved after being cleaned of the mud and sweat he was covered in upon arrival. Based on this and his own observations, Gangrav concludes that he senses no hostility from Shuri and therefore will not have him killed. Lil states that her primary interest lies in the boy's mysterious clothing. She admits that even as an expert on inventions, she cannot identify the fabric or the sewing techniques used, finding them completely alien. Kagaya watches with a troubled expression, quietly wondering if this person could be connected to the figures from ancient legends. She internally weighs the risks, fearing that if they let Shuri go, the powerful organization known as the Temple, might take him in and silence their mercenary group to keep him a secret. Gangrav notices her concern and asks if it's related to the Temple, but she quickly dismisses it as nothing, saying she'll question him about it later. Deciding to take charge of the interrogation himself, Gangrav orders all of his officers to wait outside the tent. He enters just as Shuri begins to stir, surprising the groggy young man as he sits up. The scene flashes back to the initial questioning, where Shuri's claim of being from an island nation called Japan is revealed to the officers. Kaguya and Gangrav react with shock, asking if he means he came from across the treacherous outer sea. The other female officers listen intently, their expressions a mixture of skepticism and intrigue. Their reactions vary. Orius has never heard of another continent, Teg is incredulous, Asagi claims to have heard rumors, and Kuga deems crossing the ocean to be impossible. Gangrav explains to the group that the outer sea is the vast ocean that surrounds their entire continent. He elaborates that while the continent is large, it is completely encircled by this impassable sea, made deadly by raging storms and ferocious sea creatures. The mercenary leader processes the implications. If Shuri's story is true, it is a monumental discovery, proving the existence of another world from which humans can travel. He struggles to comprehend the sheer scale of this revelation, realizing that the more he thinks about it, the more tangled and unbelievable the story becomes. He decides to summarize the facts as they know them, starting with the man's name, Azuma Shuri. He continues, stating that Shuri claims to be from a place called Hiroshima in Japan and, most unbelievably, that he is 20 years old, a fact that stuns Orius, who marvels at his incredibly youthful skin. Gangrav sits wearily in his tent, concluding that they must now decide what to do with Shuri. The ideal solution, sending him back to his homeland, is impossible since they don't even know if this Japan exists. The next and quickest option would be to simply cast him out, as the mercenary group cannot afford to carry unnecessary burdens. But as a candle flickers on the table, Gangrav hesitates, unable to commit to such a cruel fate. He reflects that his impression of Shuri is that of a straightforward, perhaps carefree, but ultimately not a bad person. It wouldn't feel right to throw him out into the wilderness to die. This leaves only one viable option: hire him and assign him to odd jobs within the company. He flashes back to Shuri's desperate plea to be allowed to stay, promising to do any work required of him. Having decided to keep him, Gangrav gathers his officers to determine which unit Shuri should be assigned to. Lil, the magic engineer, immediately refuses, stating her unit has no use for someone without magic engineering skills. Orius, the magic division captain, also declines, noting that her all-female unit would have problems accommodating a man who can't use magic. Gangrav concedes the point, as both units are highly specialized for magic and magic engineering users. Asagi, the special operations captain, likewise says her unit is out of the question, as it would be pointless to place a non-combatant there. Altros, the commander of the heavy infantry, gives a subtle shake of his helmeted head, signaling his refusal. Gangrav understands. Shuri is clearly not suited for frontline combat in the 2nd Infantry Unit. Kaguya of the intelligence unit also finds him unsuitable, and it's noted that Shuri probably can't even ride a horse, making her unit a poor fit as well. Kuga, the 1st Infantry commander, points out that this leaves only her unit and Teg's archery unit as the remaining options. Teg quickly objects, but Kuga states her unit could take him if he can use a weapon at all. She adds with a sadistic grin that he would, of course, have to survive her, Spartan-style, training first. Gangrav immediately dismisses the idea, knowing that Kuga's brutal training would surely be the end of Shuri. This leaves Teg's unit as the only option left, a conclusion that fills the archer with dread as Shuri hides his face in his hands. The commanders are at an impasse, unable to find a suitable place for the boy. Just then, an idea strikes Shuri, and he announces that he feels like cooking something. The narrative jumps back to this moment, showing Gangrav's utter shock as he asks the boy if he can actually cook. Shuri confirms that he has received a fair amount of training in the culinary arts. He then offers to make them all a dish he calls cream stew. The dish he prepared was unbelievably delicious. A close-up view shows the hearty, glistening stew that won over the entire camp. Gangrav remembers the profound shock of the flavor, something he had never experienced in his life. He recalls the smooth, pleasant texture of the soup, the sweetness of the milk, and the tang of the cheese that tied it all together. Overjoyed, he had declared the dish flawless and that Shuri was officially approved. The other soldiers are shown eating with gusto, proclaiming it to be the most delicious and satisfying meal they've ever had. The command staff is equally impressed, with a Seijai calling it great and Teg declaring they will now be 100 times stronger for the next battle. A blushing Kagaya vows to improve her own cooking skills, and Orius agrees she must learn from him. Kuga devours her portion, while Lil, who is rarely satisfied, admits that she is truly content. Lil sagely states that good food is just good, and Kuga enthusiastically agrees that's all that matters. The entire group of elite officers, once divided and stressed, now eat together with happy, satisfied expressions. Gangrav watches this transformation, a look of profound realization on his face. Seeing the effect of this mysterious dish from an unknown land, he begins to believe that Shuri's story of coming from beyond the sea might not be a lie after all. He concludes that if there are advanced technologies across the sea and Shuri is a gatekeeper to that knowledge, then he must be protected at all costs. Shuri's skills, knowledge, and his calm performance under pressure are invaluable, and it would be a tragic waste to lose him. As the soldiers continue to praise him, Shuri humbly deflects their compliments. A faint, knowing smile plays on Gangrav's lips. He places a firm hand on Shuri's shoulder, officially welcoming him to the mercenary group and saying he looks forward to working with him. A surprised Shuri looks at Gangrav and offers a heartfelt thank you. He then smiles brightly, accepting his new role and asking them to take care of him. Gangrav addresses the entire camp, telling Shuri that he is counting on him to support them all with his culinary skills from this day forward. The scene pulls back to an overview of the camp, as a narrator declares this moment to be the beginning of a hero story that will be passed down for generations. An epilogue begins, describing the 100-year Dark War era on the Sabaryu continent, a time of constant battle and bloodshed that was ended by the rise of a single, remarkable individual. That individual was the great king who would unify the continent, Gungrave Denju Apurata. Revered as the first and last hero king, he brought an end to the warring states, and among the many legends told of him, a particular story is always preserved. The story tells of a time when a vassal asked the king how he managed to accomplish the impossible task of ending the warring states period. Everyone present expected him to credit his military strategies, his personal combat prowess, his charisma, or his skill in politics. However, King Gungrave simply replied that it was a hearty stew that ended the chaos of war. He explained that while he once believed military strength and political skill were enough to build a nation, he learned that reality is different, and people will not follow a leader based on those things alone. The truly necessary foundation for a nation, he stated, is a delicious meal that fills the belly, as good food enriches the human spirit and creates goodwill among people. That, he concluded, was the profound lesson his dear friend had taught him from the bottom of his heart. The tale ends, stating this was the story of the great King Gungrave and his companions, who would come to be known as the 9 Heroes, their legend passed down through the ages. In the Rainbell Hills, Gungrave fights desperately on horseback amidst the chaos of battle. While his forces have successfully broken through the enemy's main line, other soldiers are beginning to rout, shouting that they can't hold any longer and must retreat. Gungrave seizes the advantage, roaring to his troops that they are to transition into mop-up operations and crush the remaining enemy. Inspired by their leader, the cavalry charges forward with renewed determination. Gungrave leads the charge from the front, cutting a path through the swirling melee of soldiers and horses. Back at the mercenary camp, the non-combatants, including Shuri, spot the returning army and begin to cheer, announcing that everyone is back. Shuri watches with a smile as the camp fills with shouts of celebration for their great victory. The triumphant soldiers crowd around Shuri, giving him all the credit and declaring that his cooking was what caused their morale to skyrocket and win them the day. This praise leaves Shuri wide-eyed and utterly speechless. He then sees Gungrave, Kuga, and Ultros approaching, their armor spattered with mud and blood from the fierce fighting. The raw evidence of the bloodshed makes Shuri blush and recoil in horror. The grim reality finally sinks in for him. This truly is a battlefield. A brief title card marks the beginning of the new chapter's main story. The narrative refocuses on Shuri, who reminds the audience of his name, Azuma Shuri. He recounts his strange fate, having been suddenly transported to another world where he now works as the cook for Gungrave's mercenary group. With the battle now concluded, he looks forward to visiting a nearby town for some rest. He sits down to a meal with Gungrave, who has changed out of his armor and tells Shuri he wants to reward the troops for their hard work. Gungrave then expresses his concern about taking Shuri into town, reminding him that his status as someone from beyond the outer sea makes him a potential liability. He warns that if Shuri acts in a way that defies this world's common sense, it could breed mistrust and cause problems for everyone. Feeling uneasy about the ongoing misunderstanding, Shuri decides that he must make the truth of his situation perfectly clear. He tells Gungrave plainly that he is not from the outer sea or any part of this continent, because he is not a human from this world at all. The revelation is so shocking that Gungrave drops his goblet, spilling its contents across the table as he stares in disbelief. He grabs Shuri by the shoulders, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and awe, and asks if he is from Kamakura, the legendary land of the gods. Gungrave quickly explains that Kamakura is a mythical place central to the legends of the Sobralyu continent. According to the legend, the creator god of the continent revealed himself and then disappeared, after which extraordinary humans began to appear. The people of this world came to believe that these special humans, who received their lives directly from the gods, came from that sacred, vanished land. Thus, this mythical place of origin came to be known as Kamakura, the land of the gods. The legend also holds that the wise ones who first introduced magic to the continent were residents of Kamakura. Shuri is taken aback by the mention of magic, processing the new, world-altering information. The realization hits him like a thunderclap. He is in a world where magic is real. For a moment, his shock gives way to excitement as he imagines himself as the protagonist in a manga, a hero from another world blessed with magical talent. Gungrave quickly shatters this fantasy, however, by bluntly informing him that he appears to have no magical aptitude whatsoever. Shuri's excitement immediately deflates into chibi-style sadness. Gungrave claps him on the back, attempting to cheer him up by reminding him that his incredible cooking skills are more than enough to get by in this world. Returning to the serious topic, Gungrave explains that people believed to be from Kamakura are not looked upon favorably by a certain powerful organization. He identifies this organization as the Temple, a religious state in the southern region that believes in the absolute supremacy of the continent and views any outsiders as abominable beings. The terrifying implication dawns on Shuri. Because he is from another world, he could be targeted for purging by this fanatical group, making his very existence a danger to those around him. Gungrave reassures him, however, telling him not to worry too much. As long as he doesn't openly flaunt his otherworldly knowledge, he will likely just be seen as a good cook. He instructs Shuri to simply do his job and lay low, at least until they can find a way for him to return to his own world. Shuri smiles, agreeing to the terms and promising to repay Gungrave for taking him in. While a trip to town is off the table, Gungrave offers to get him something else as a reward and asks if there is anything he wants. Shuri puts a thoughtful finger to his chin, considering what he could possibly ask for. Later, he seeks out Asajai, the captain of the Special Operations Unit, who is also Gungrave's childhood friend. He is immediately flustered by her revealing outfit as he approaches. Asajai notices his gaze and playfully teases him, asking if he sees something he likes, which causes him to blush furiously. He frantically denies it and begs her to stop, while she laughs, admitting that she finds it amusing to tease someone so pure-hearted. After clarifying he is looking for Lil's tent, Asajai leads him to the correct location. Shuri enters and finds Lil, the magic engineer, lounging amidst a clutter of books, scrolls, and alchemical equipment. Lil looks up at him, stating that Gungrave has already told her about him. Shuri enthusiastically asks Lil if she would be willing to make some cooking tools for him. He explains that the utensils in this world are different from what he's accustomed to, and their usability is poor, so he hoped Lil, a user of magic tools, could help. Lil confirms that she is the captain of a magic crafting unit, and her skill, officially known as magic crafting, uses magical power to reshape objects and grant them special abilities. Shuri then unrolls a series of drawings, specifying his requests: a chef's knife, a cutting board, and a frying pan. Lil examines the designs with a critical eye, questioning the need for a new cutting board and pointing out that his frying pan is too shallow for making soup. He clarifies that while the unit has a small, portable cutting board that is kept clean, the primary one is completely unusable. He shudders, recalling that the cutting board he was given the day before was blackened and covered in mold. Hearing about the sorry state of their equipment, Lil's professional pride is sparked, and she winks, saying that she's now feeling motivated. Overjoyed, Shuri asks when she can begin, and she immediately leaps into action, declaring that she will start right away. She gathers the raw materials for the project: a rough chunk of iron ore and a block of wood. With a determined grin, she announces that they will start by crafting the kitchen knife. She places her hands on the ore, and an aura of dark magical energy begins to swirl around it. Shuri watches, stunned, as the solid ore seems to melt and contort in her grasp. He is astounded by the raw strength on display, realizing that this must be the power of magic at work. Lil explains the process. First, she must knead the metal while infusing it with magical power, which increases its hardness, a concept Shuri connects to research from his own world. He mentions that in his world, they achieve a similar result by mixing carbon with metal and heating it to remove impurities. This casual mention of advanced metallurgy stops Lil dead in her tracks. She stares at him in utter confusion, asking what on earth he means by that. She grabs him by the shirt, her face a mixture of shock and excitement, and demands a full explanation of the process he just described. Shuri admits he doesn't know the fine details, but he understands the basic principle that raw metal is full of impurities. He proceeds to share his basic scientific knowledge, explaining the concept of differing melting points and how applying heat can separate substances. Despite his admission that this is merely common sense knowledge on Earth, the scientifically minded Lil is fascinated and bombards him with questions. After their long discussion, Lil thoughtfully processes the new information, pondering concepts like the creation of carbon dioxide from combustion. She clarifies that the iron they are using is considered to be of good quality. However, she now understands that the magic crafting techniques on the continent are still immature and that even their best iron must be full of impurities. With this new insight, she declares that the first step must be to remove those impurities. She focuses her magical energy with renewed purpose, her expression one of intense concentration. Under her skilled hands, the metal writhes and glows as she begins the purification process. Shuri watches as dark, slag-like chunks are visibly forced out of the molten metal, realizing he is witnessing the removal of the impurities. Once the metal is purified, she concentrates on blending in the carbon he described, finally shaping the material into a flawless, gleaming ingot. He is blown away by the beautiful finish and praises Lil for her amazing skill. A flustered but proud Lil puffs out her cheeks, trying to downplay her delight at his compliment. When he continues to praise her, she breaks into a wide, genuinely happy smile. He returns her smile, genuinely impressed by her abilities. He then asks her to shape the purified metal according to his design, and she confidently agrees. After a long and arduous session of crafting that lasts until dusk, the new tools are finally complete. A perfectly balanced chef's knife and a sturdy frying pan lie on the table, and Shuri thanks Lil, ecstatic that he can now cook a meal he is truly satisfied with. Lil, however, is completely drained, collapsing onto her desk and complaining that his requests were far too detailed and exhausting. A montage reveals the grueling trial and error process they went through, with Shuri constantly asking for minute adjustments to the tools to match his ideal specifications. Trying to distract the weary craftsman, Shuri asks what kind of items she usually makes. The question instantly revives her spirits, and she perks up, exclaiming that it's a good question. She proudly declares that she has no specialty in magic crafting because her true joy comes from creating all kinds of new and different things. As an example, she shows him a piece of paper enchanted to transmit sound, admitting it's still a prototype that only works as a simple megaphone. She then demonstrates another invention, a piece of paper that can be ignited with magical energy, but notes it's useless for those without magical ability. Next, she presents a floating board, another work in progress, leading Shuri to realize her workshop is filled with unfinished products. His attention is drawn to the strange, single character written on one of the magic items, and he asks Lil about its meaning. She explains that it is a magi spell, which is written on a magic crystal with special crushed pigments. She elaborates that magic crystals naturally store magical energy, and by inscribing them with magi spells, a craftsman can grant objects special powers. Shuri then asks why she only uses a single character, suggesting multiple characters would be more effective, but Lil explains that attempting to use multiple magi spells at once usually results in chaotic, runaway magic. He questions her reasoning, suggesting that the chaos is simply a result of activating multiple spells simultaneously without a control mechanism. He then proposes a revolutionary idea. Couldn't they just write a separate, single magi spell designed to stabilize the others and ensure they activate at the same time? To explain, he uses the analogy of an electronic circuit from his world, describing the need for pathways to transmit commands and a mechanism to switch between functions. The concept hits Lil with the force of a revelation, leaving her utterly stunned. She grabs his arms, her eyes sparkling with inspiration, and joyfully exclaims that he might be a genius. She realizes that she had never considered the need for a separate mechanism to stabilize or control multiple magical effects simultaneously. Her mind immediately begins working through the possibilities, but she hits a snag. A single piece of paper might not be large enough to accommodate such a complex mechanism. Shuri, applying another piece of simple common sense from his world, suggests that if the paper isn't big enough, she could just stack multiple pieces together. The elegant simplicity of the solution strikes her, and she points at him, shouting, "That's it." She understands now that by stacking enchanted papers or boards, she can create a single tool with numerous, stable capabilities. Overcome with joy at the breakthrough, she wonders how she never thought of something so simple, while Shuri is just pleased that his idea was so well received. Lil pumps her fist, declaring this a new technological breakthrough, and grabs a startled Shuri, excitedly yelling, "Let's do it." A new challenge is presented to Shuri and Lil, one that promises to give birth to new creations. The narration introduces Lil, a young woman who, despite not being widely known yet, considers herself a genius. It is clear to those around her that she is destined for greatness and will undoubtedly leave her mark on history. Lil's unique talent is for magical craftsmanship, a discipline that is distinctly different from traditional magic. Traditional magic involves manipulating one's own magical energy and the mana in the air to create phenomena in the environment. Magical craftsmanship, by contrast, manipulates one's own mana in conjunction with the energy residing within objects to alter their physical properties. In essence, while magic can create something from nothing, magical craftsmanship requires a physical object to serve as a base. Though Lil once wished she had the talent for traditional magic, she came to realize that the path of a magical craftsman suited her personality far better. She spent her days in enjoyable trial and error, working to create new techniques, though her constant experiments were often a source of frustration for Gungrave. The costs associated with her research and inventions were a significant drain on the group's finances, a constant worry for Gungrave who managed everything himself. Lil felt a sense of guilt over this, as her inventions had yet to reach a level of practical use for the mercenary group. Her frustration grew with each failed experiment, but since this was the only path she knew, she continued to give it her all. The narrative then returns to Gungrave's request for her to make cooking tools for Shuri, an idea that initially confused her. Gungrave had explained that Shuri's homeland used different tools and that he wanted Lil to create them for their new cook. Lil was hesitant at first, though she knew Shuri's food was the best she had ever tasted. She had not yet had a chance to speak with him. She found him mysterious and difficult to approach, his incredible cooking skills setting him apart from everyone else. Gungrave had encouraged her, telling her not to be dissatisfied and that she might find talking to Shuri interesting. When she asked what he meant, he simply smiled and told her she would understand once she spoke to him. At the time, she didn't grasp his meaning, but she would soon come to realize the truth in his words. Honestly, Lil was quite dissatisfied, having always dreamed of creating refined, purposeful inventions rather than simple kitchen utensils. However, the blueprints Shuri provided were fascinating, containing shapes and concepts for tools she had never seen before. She recognized in Shuri's meticulous attention to his tools the unwavering obsession of a true craftsman, much like herself. She then understood what Gungrave meant. Talking to Shuri was indeed a fascinating experience. It wasn't just his designs but his incredible knowledge, such as his explanation of how people in his world mixed carbon into metal and heated it to remove impurities. This revelation shocked her, as the process he described was a closely guarded secret of the blacksmithing and weapon forging guilds. She recalled a time she had tried to learn this hidden technique, only to be strictly forbidden by the guild's master blacksmiths. Their conversation was a torrent of new information, with Shuri's knowledge being vastly different and full of unfamiliar concepts that prompted her to ask endless questions. He began to explain the fundamental nature of matter, starting with the concept of elementary particles. He described how all substances are composed of tiny atoms, which in turn bind together to form complex molecules. This incredible, foundational knowledge left Lil utterly speechless. She questioned him about everything from the nature of air and water to the earth and sky, and he answered every query. The exchange was a fascinating revelation for her, making her realize that her own knowledge was but a tiny fraction of what was possible, like that of an infant. Armed with this new understanding, she re-evaluated her own craft, concluding that the magical engineering on the continent was underdeveloped and that their materials were surely full of impurities. Though it was her first time attempting such a purification process, the knowledge from Shuri allowed her to visualize and control the magical energy with unprecedented precision. She knew that talent alone was not enough for magic or engineering. What was truly important was the belief that she could succeed. As she finally created a flawless ingot of purified steel, she felt she had at last understood the words of the legendary magical engineer, Arthuria, and had comprehended the true nature of her craft. The finished tools were a resounding success, and a delighted Shuri praised her, saying he could now make a truly satisfying dish. Lil, however, was completely exhausted, having discovered that the level of technical skill Shuri demanded was incredibly high and challenging, perhaps even beyond that of a royal court chef. She came to see his unwavering obsession with perfection not as a flaw, but as the mark of a genius who endlessly pursues their craft without compromise. In that moment, she was certain of one thing: Shuri was a genius. She admitted to herself that in the realm of cooking and creativity, he was a genius who far surpassed even her own considerable talents. And then, after all their hard work and collaboration, their new project was finally complete. A blueprint for a magical stove is shown, a creation Lil was finally able to complete by pushing her knowledge and ideas to the limit. She reflects that Shuri provided so many stimulating ideas, his fresh perspective being a welcome change from working only with her subordinates. This new creation filled her with an unparalleled sense of fulfillment, a feeling completely different from the pride she felt for her previous inventions, which were only ideal concepts. Shuri promises to make delicious dishes with the tools she made, but Lil realizes the good feeling isn't just because the technology is superior. The ultimate masterpiece she created isn't a tool for killing people, but one that will remain in ordinary households even after the war ends, becoming a part of culture and history. This is the kind of fame she was truly seeking, a deeply rooted cultural blossoming that would be used by all, regardless of status. Having spent her entire life inventing and sacrificing everything for her craft, she felt that perhaps the gods had finally taken notice of her efforts. But she corrects herself, realizing it wasn't the gods, but Shuri who gave her this opportunity. A look of serene contentment crosses her face as she rests, basking in the feeling of true accomplishment. Her peaceful moment is interrupted. Shuri bursts in, waking the sleeping Lil to announce that he has made a new dish for her to try. He places a piece of the meat into her mouth before she can fully react. The flavor explodes on her palate, and she is overcome with how delicious it is. For the first time, she feels that meat is truly tasty, with no unpleasant smell or tough, greasy parts. The juice from the tender meat overflows, filling her entire mouth with incredible flavor. The sauce that accompanies the dish is also outstanding, perfectly suited to her tastes and elevating the flavor even further. She realizes that in Shuri's hands, even the strange-smelling condiment called soy sauce becomes an incredible ingredient, proving Gungrave's spice shopping was not in vain. She is truly amazed by Shuri's cooking skill, which goes far beyond simply making rare dishes. He has the ability to combine available ingredients in perfect ratios, completely transforming them into something new and bringing a new creation into existence. She continues to eat, completely engrossed in the experience. Afterward, Lil received several more requests from Shuri for tools that could help him process ingredients. Happy to cooperate if it helps make something delicious, she readily agrees to his requests. She then asks him how he is able to come up with so many new ideas. Shuri admits that he used to fail a lot at first, a confession that surprises Lil, given his current skill level. He explains that his father was very strict about cooking, and that in the beginning, he failed constantly and was forced to eat his own failed dishes. But he admired his father, and that's why he trained so hard, building the foundation for the skills he has today. He tells her that the ability to come up with new ideas in cooking doesn't come just from experience. It comes from constantly thinking about how to make things even more delicious. He tries never to forget that spirit of constant improvement, working hard every day to innovate. The words, creativity and innovation echo in Lil's mind as she listens to him. She reflects on her own work, how she would proudly showcase her inventions to Shuri, only for them to be impractical, unfinished products that were ultimately just trash. As a result, only useless tools kept piling up, affecting the group's budget, because she was content with what she had and didn't strive to improve her creations. This pitiful state, she realizes, is her sin and her punishment for her lack of true innovation. She recalls Shuri looking at her flying board and pointing out how convenient it could be. He suggested it could be used to move heavy items with ease and to transport cargo without it getting damaged by shocks. The new perspective leaves her momentarily stunned. Originally, she had limited her concept of the flying board to something that only people could ride, but Shuri's practical applications showed her its true potential. By changing her perspective, she saw that her invention could reduce the effort of transport and act as cushioning to prevent damage. She thanks Shuri, who is confused by her sudden gratitude. She explains that she had thought it was a failed invention, but he was the one who gave the tool a new meaning and purpose. This becomes her first step on a new path. From now on, instead of dismissing her creations as useless, she will find a purpose for them. Once she can do that, she will improve and refine those tools, creating things with real meaning. Things that are truly useful to people. Gungrave stands in a desolate, hilly landscape and asks Lil what she wants from him. She tells him that she has a new invention she wants him to see. Weary from her past failures, Gungrave sighs and asks if it is just another one of her prototypes. Lil proudly announces that this time she has a finished product, presenting a small, dark stone and mentioning she made two. Gungrave takes the item and inspects it, unimpressed, asking if it's just a common pebble. Telling him to watch closely, Lil takes the stone and speaks an activation word before throwing it. The stone skips across the barren ground, coming to a rest some distance away. A moment later, a massive explosion erupts from the stone, blasting a crater in the earth and shocking Gungrave. Lil calmly explains that the item is an explosive stone, which detonates 3 seconds after a magic word is spoken. Alarmed by its power, Gungrave calls the weapon far too dangerous and asks what would prevent it from exploding in someone's pocket, but Lil assures him that safety measures are in place. She explains a 3-tiered safety system. The stone won't arm unless it's held in a hand, the countdown only begins once it's released, and it has a proximity sensor that prevents it from exploding near the user. She reveals that she was able to incorporate these 3 advanced functions based on feedback from Shuri. Gungrave is amazed, admitting he has never heard of magic spells with such sophisticated safety features. Lil then presents her second invention, a timed flare stone, and points to a distant rock, declaring that it will ignite in 5 seconds. As she counts down, Gungrave watches the target area with anticipation. On cue, a brilliant pillar of fire bursts from the designated spot. Gungrave is once again shocked, questioning how Lil, a magic engineer who works with objects, could create a phenomenon like fire from nothing. She explains that the stone can be set with a timer of up to 2 hours, after which it will emit flames for 10 seconds before completely vanishing without a trace. Impressed, Gungrave realizes the tool is perfect for covert operations, as it leaves no evidence behind. He declares that her inventions are finally practical, not just for show, and agrees to allocate funds for further research and development. He then wonders how her research team managed to develop such an amazing tool so quickly. When Lil informs him that she created it just now, Gungrave accuses her of lying, finding it impossible that she could have developed such complex magic spells in a short time. She urges him to look closer at the device, pointing out that it utilizes a completely new kind of magic spell. Gungrave inspects the flare stone and is horrified by the sheer number of spells engraved upon it, fearing that such a complex enchantment could easily go out of control. Lil explains that she was able to engrave countless magic spells on the stones by using a new concept she learned from Shuri. She calls her new system a magic program, which stabilizes and controls the flow of power to multiple spells, preventing magical overloads, and is activated by touch and a specific command word. Gungrave can only laugh in utter astonishment at the breakthrough. He praises her, declaring that she truly is a genius, but Lil internally disagrees, thinking that she is not a genius at all. She believes a true genius is someone like Shuri, and that she merely borrowed a fraction of his talent, seeing herself as an immature person who had neglected proper training. But she resolves that from this moment on, things will be different for her. She understands that what she truly lacked was not talent, but the effort and the flexibility to learn from the wisdom of others. She vows to dedicate herself to her craft, aiming to become someone who can create with true purpose and one day surpass even Shuri's level of creativity. An epilogue begins, introducing her to history as Lil Blanche, one of the great heroes who profoundly influenced the civilization and culture of future generations. Many of the tools she created, like the magical stove, still exist in modern times, having undergone improvements to become inseparable from daily life. Her innovations were numerous, including communication devices and magical vehicles that became the foundation of modern civilization. Because she laid the groundwork for so many future advancements, she became known to history as the mother of invention. It is said that while Lil Blanche crafted many tools for conflict during the war, she was more famous for creating technology that enriched the lives of the people, becoming a cornerstone of her era. Despite her remarkable achievements, she later declined the prestigious position of Chief Magic Engineer in the newly established Unified Kingdom. Instead, she founded the private Blanche School of Magic Engineering, where she taught her techniques openly to many students while continuing her own research. While the school grew into one of the largest research institutions on the continent, it was noted for having surprisingly few departments dedicated to the development of weaponry. Lil Blanche left behind words explaining her philosophy. Her technology was not for war, because she believed that if technology for war develops too much, war itself becomes a conflict driven by technology. She feared a terrifying future where warfare becomes a mere business endeavor, resulting in a continent turned to scorched earth and devoid of life. Her greatest fear was the transformation of warfare through technology, and she sought instead to use her craft to illuminate the future and ensure humanity's prosperity. The foundation of her peaceful and beneficial technology lies in the words she left behind at her academy. The phrase creative ingenuity became the guiding principle and spirit of the institution she founded. History also recorded her personal quirks, namely an unmatched love for hamburgers, with her happy demeanor while eating them said to have brought warmth to all around her. A final image shows her happily preparing to eat a hamburger steak with a knife and fork. According to one popular theory, however, her love for hamburgers was so intense that it bordered on obsession, though the truth of this particular claim remains uncertain. One focused on discovering the origins of Shuri from the perspective of a friend. The narrator introduces a man named Azuma Shuri. The most fitting description for him, the narrator suggests, is the old saying that a thin line separates a fool from a genius. To understand Shuri, the story shifts its focus to a central figure in his life, a close friend named Yamagishi. Shuri and Yamagishi had a deep connection, having been inseparable friends from elementary school all the way through their high school graduation. Their friendship first began in the 3rd grade of elementary school. At the time, Shuri's homemade lunches were such terrible failures, pitch black, gooey, and crispy, that the mere sight of them made Yamagishi feel nauseous. As this continued week after week, Shuri, being forced to eat his own inedible creations, gradually started to lose weight. Unable to watch this happen any longer, Yamagishi decided to intervene, asking Shuri if his mother was a bad cook. Shuri sheepishly corrected him, admitting that the failed lunch was his own creation. Though flustered, Shuri managed to ask a simple question in response: had Yamagishi read a cookbook? This simple phrase was an awakening for Shuri, who realized with a flash of insight that a cookbook was what he needed and profusely thanked his friend. From the very next day, the change in Shuri's bento was remarkable, growing more delicious with each passing day as Yamagishi asked him to share. 2 months later, his lunches had transformed so completely that they were almost unrecognizable from his initial disastrous attempts. Around this time, Yamagishi's interest in Shuri deepened, and as they spent more time together, their friendship grew stronger. Yamagishi observed that outside of his intense focus on cooking, Shuri was quite ordinary in every other aspect, with average intellect and athletic ability. However, there were times when Shuri would do something completely unpredictable. During an elementary school field trip, for example, Shuri suddenly went missing, causing a panic among his classmates and teachers. The teachers grew frantic as they searched for him, realizing it was a serious problem when he was nowhere to be found. The search ended when a local chef reported that a child had been in his kitchen all morning, and he wondered if it was one of their students. That child was, of course, Shuri, who had been completely captivated by watching a professional chef at work, his eyes sparkling with delight. After seeing Shuri get harshly scolded by his teacher for the incident, Yamagishi came to believe that his friend was anything but ordinary. He was something special. On another occasion at a theme park, Shuri was completely bewildered, having never seen such a place before and asking what people do there. Despite these eccentricities, Yamagishi remained a loyal friend to Shuri even as they entered middle school. During middle school, Shuri's behavior became more stable and he began to be seen as normal by those around him before advancing to a local high school. It was in high school that Shuri's talent truly became famous during the first-year cultural festival when the class decided to run a yakisoba stall. Shuri announced that he would not be making ordinary yakisoba, but a special 5-flavored version. Seeing the lack of enthusiasm from his classmates, he took it upon himself to gather all the necessary ingredients and tools. He declared to his class that if they were going to sell something, it couldn't be ordinary, showing his uncompromising passion for creating unique dishes. After instructing the other students to fry the noodles until crispy, Shuri began the main cooking process. He had prepared an extensive list of ingredients, including various meats, vegetables, mushrooms, and the components for a complex sauce. He began the prep work, first cutting the meat and vegetables into bite-sized pieces and then meticulously deveining the shrimp. Once the prep was complete, he stir-fried the pork and vegetables, set them aside, and then cooked the shrimp after coating them in potato starch. He then simmered a sauce made from Chinese soup, sugar, soy sauce, sake, and oyster sauce, finally thickening it with potato starch and adding sesame oil for aroma. The rich, five-flavored sauce was then poured over the crispy noodles, completing the dish. The yakisoba stall was a massive success, with customers praising the delicious, restaurant-quality sauce and making the dish a huge hit. For the next 2 years until graduation, Shuri was entrusted with running the class's food stall at the festival, and he successfully managed it each time. Throughout their 3 years of high school, Yamagishi and Shuri spent all their time together, whether they were playing or studying. They became best friends, even sampling new dishes together as Shuri honed his craft. Incidentally, Yamagishi had his own share of troubles during that time. During one summer vacation, he took a trip abroad by himself and went missing for a while, only returning the day before school started. He claimed he had been gambling, and his knowledge on the subject was so advanced that Shuri couldn't question him any further. On the night of their graduation, Yamagishi felt a sense of finality as their school days came to an end. He called Shuri, who was packing his bags for his apprenticeship in Tokyo. Yamagishi wished him well, and Shuri replied that he preferred not to change who he was. He admitted the training would be tough and he might want to run away, but he was determined to see it through no matter what. Yamagishi listened quietly on the other end of the line. He teased Shuri about his past failures, reminding him of the time he tried to make miso from scratch with soybeans. But he quickly followed up with a compliment, admitting that Shuri's homemade miso ended up being better than anything store-bought. Yamagishi ended the call, saying he was going to bed soon as Shuri had to leave the next day. There was a brief, silent pause on the line before the call ended. Yamagishi had wanted to say more, but changed his mind, simply telling his friend he would see him in 2 years. Shuri cheerfully agreed, and with that, their final conversation as high school students concluded. However, 2 years later, Yamagishi would never get the chance to meet Shuri again. This story serves as the biography of Azuma Shuri, a man from Earth, before the stage of his life was set in a world he could never have imagined. Shuri's tale truly begins in that distant, other world. A hand slams down in frustration as a person internally questions the fundamental nature of talent and effort. This person, a young man in an apron, voices his despair at being unable to get things right no matter how many times he tries, feeling lost when asked about it. He recalls his father's definition of talent as a natural ability and effort as something acquired later, a concept that doesn't feel right to him. The scene shifts abruptly to a sharp, intense gaze from a long-haired swordsman, his hand resting on the hilt of his weapon. Back with the young man, a quiet determination burns within him, even though he still can't clearly define the concepts of talent and effort. He greets the audience, introducing himself as Azuma Shuri while standing in a military camp with what appear to be food supplies. Shuri explains that a month has passed since he arrived in this other world, specifically on the continent of Sabureu, as he walks through a camp filled with soldiers. Despite having gathered information on local seasonings like soy sauce, sake, and mirin, he still hasn't discovered a way to return to his own world. He learned that these seasonings were developed hundreds of years ago by someone from Kamakura village, but that's where the trail of information went cold. His attention shifts to the present, noting that a battle is expected today by the coastal forest over control of the salt trade. He considers salt a necessity, not just for cooking in general, but specifically because a girl named Lil has recently become obsessed with his hamburger steaks, a dish that would be a disaster without it. The thought of Lil reminds him that she made a significant impact in a recent battle, earning a large amount of funding and food supplies, a fact she seems quite proud of. With these new, abundant supplies, he muses that it might be a good opportunity to ask Gungrave to hire more staff for the kitchen. The perspective pulls back, showing a wide view of the entire military encampment nestled in a clearing in the woods. Back in the kitchen area, Shuri is focused on his task, stirring a large pot of stew with chopsticks. While ladling out a portion to taste, something in the distance catches his eye, causing him to pause with a look of confusion. Through the trees at the edge of the camp, a cloaked figure stands with a sword at their side before moving into the forest. Shuri asks a nearby female soldier if she saw someone over there, but she appears startled and uncertain. She quickly insists that she is all right and tells him not to worry, brushing off his concern. Shuri internally identifies this person as Kagaya-san, the captain of an intelligence unit. He recalls that she was formerly part of a religious organization called the Temple, and also holds the qualifications of a shrine maiden, making her a warrior priestess. He finds himself admiring her pure and demure beauty, noting her graceful and polite demeanor with a blush. He feels a sense of relief, thinking that the presence of people like her helps him avoid getting caught up in the erotic field of another person named Asagi-san. A massive, muscular man in a helmet tells Kaguya that he's fine, seemingly in response to an unstated question. Shuri identifies this powerful figure as Ultros, the leader of the 2nd Infantry Battalion. He observes Ultros's incredibly impressive physique, seeing him as a true symbol of a strong man. Shuri notes that Ultros is a man of few words who expresses himself through actions, and despite his intimidating appearance, he's a genuinely nice person. Kaguya turns her attention back to Shuri, asking what brought him over, and he explains that he thought he saw someone go into the woods. Kaguya processes this information with a look of understanding while Ultros stands silently beside her. She sighs with resignation, concluding that it must be Kuga again, a name that prompts Shuri to ask if this is a recurring event. Kaguya explains that whenever Kuga struggles with his sword training, he goes off into the forest to practice alone. She adds that for Kuga, this solitary practice is the best way for him to work through his problems. Shuri looks towards the forest, quietly accepting this explanation for the figure he saw. The scene briefly returns to a wide shot of the camp, showing the tents against the backdrop of the dense woods. Later, as soldiers are eating, one comments appreciatively that the day's stew is quite luxurious because it contains shrimp. Another agrees, stating that delicious, fresh shrimp is one of the things he looks forward to most when they are near a seaside town, even though it spoils quickly. A man named Gungrave tells Shuri the stew was delicious, and Shuri explains that adding shrimp to fish dishes makes everything taste good. Another person asks if shrimp is a precious commodity, but Gungrave clarifies that since it can't be preserved, it's considered more of a local specialty. This talk of preservation makes Shuri wistfully consider the amazing transportation and preservation technologies of modern Earth, and he wonders when he'll ever be able to return. Shifting topics, Shuri mentions to Gungrave that he just saw Mr. Kuga heading into the forest. Gungrave sighs, calling Kuga an idiot and correctly guessing he's off training with his sword to deal with some slump or personal worry. Shuri suggests that it might be better to talk to Kuga about his troubles, but Gungrave counters that it would have the opposite effect and that it's best to leave him alone until he calms down. When Shuri asks for clarification, Gungrave states plainly that when it comes to swords, he has no advice he could possibly offer Kuga. He says this because Kuga possesses an innate talent for swordsmanship. Gungrave elaborates that in his unit, only a few people can fight effectively: Elias, who specializes in long-range firepower, Ultros, with his exceptional physical abilities, and Gungrave himself. None of the other soldiers can even compare to the skill of the sword masters. Shuri is visibly stunned and excited by the mention of a real sword master. His imagination runs wild as he realizes he's in a world of swords and magic, wondering if this means there are fantasy-like special sword techniques. Gungrave brings him back to reality, explaining there is nothing special about Kuga's technique. It's ordinary swordsmanship, unlike the famous magic-wielding swordsmen in the region. Shuri gets excited again at the confirmation that magic swordsmen exist, calling it a man's dream, before questioning what makes Kuga so different. Gungrave explains that Kuga is simply a normal human who can't use magic. His excellence lies solely in his swordsmanship and physical prowess, marking him as a child of the sword. To illustrate the point, Gungrave begins to recount a story about something that happened once. He describes a battle where Kuga advanced too far ahead of the front lines and was suddenly ambushed by hundreds of arrows. It was an absolute crisis, a situation in which any normal person would have resigned themselves to death. But incredibly, Kuga managed to cut down every single arrow, emerging from the volley without a scratch. Shuri is left completely dumbfounded and wide-eyed at this unbelievable feat. He can only think that Kuga seems more like a protagonist from a manga than he ever imagined. Shuri says it's amazing that Gungrave can fight alongside someone so powerful, and Gungrave explains his own ability is to adapt to any technique he's seen once, while Ultros relies on his incredible physical strength. Gungrave concludes that while their mage, Aureus, can fight from a distance, if he or Ultros have to engage Kuga in his effective range, they simply cannot win against him. Gungrave confesses that he only keeps up with Kuga through memory and tricks, fearing that Kuga's combination of talent and effort will eventually leave him far behind. Shuri stares with a wide-eyed, shocked expression, taking in the weight of Gungrave's admission. Confused, Shuri asks why someone like Kuga would leave him behind and questions what problem with his sword could be so great. Gungrave sighs, admitting he doesn't understand it himself. He recalls a time he tried to consult with Kuga, who becomes impossible to understand when discussing swordsmanship, speaking of abstract concepts like feeling gratitude and self-love in one's footwork, which left Gungrave utterly baffled. Shuri listens and understands, feeling as though he's witnessed a classic disconnect between a prodigy and a genius who operate on different wavelengths. Gungrave concludes that while he knows Kuga is troubled, he can't help with the swordsman's solitary training in the forest, and he tells a worried-looking Shuri that there's no need to be concerned. He gives a confident smile, asserting that Kuga is the kind of man who can manage to sort things out on his own. Shuri smiles warmly in return, observing Gungrave's deep and genuine belief in his comrade. As Shuri pours him another drink, he processes everything Gungrave told him. The very next day, Kuga once again disappears into the forest by himself, and despite Gungrave's reassurances, Shuri finds he cannot shake his feeling of worry. A memory of his own past helplessness at a job surfaces, making him wonder what he should do in this situation. That night, under a crescent moon, Shuri makes a decision and resolutely walks out of the camp. He ventures into the woods with a lantern, quickly realizing the forest at night is much darker than he had imagined. A bit of fear begins to creep in, but he pushes forward, remembering that there should be an open area just ahead. His eyes suddenly widen as he spots something in the darkness. He looks out into a moonlit clearing, surprised by the sight before him. His hand tightens its grip on the lantern he carries. He finds Kuga in the clearing, sword held high in a training posture, scarf and hair flowing in the breeze. The swordsman's expression is one of complete and utter focus. Shuri is frozen in place, watching in silent awe as Kuga flows through a series of powerful and precise sword forms. The blade cuts through the air, a silver gleam against the night sky. Kuga pivots and lunges, his movements filled with controlled intensity. His form is perfect, a picture of deadly grace and balance. Shuri finds himself thinking that the sight of such martial prowess is truly beautiful. He has seen the mercenary soldiers train before, but he now understands that Kuga's skill is on a completely different dimension. Kuga's practice halts as he senses a presence, calling out to ask who is there before recognizing Shuri and chiding him for the scare. Shuri sheepishly apologizes, explaining that he was concerned about how often Kuga was going into the forest alone. As he gets a closer look, Shuri can't help but internally note how astonishingly handsome Kuga is. He observes Kuga's symmetrical, almost feminine androgynous face and contrasts it with his reputation as a warrior who can fight 1,000 foes, which makes him curse his own appearance by comparison. Kuga smiles gently, saying he understands now and admits he thought Gungrave had put Shuri up to this. Shuri relays that Gungrave was actually upset that he couldn't solve Kuga's problems himself, prompting Kuga to acknowledge that Gungrave has his own heavy burdens to bear as well. Kuga invites Shuri to sit down, an offer the younger man nervously accepts. Kuga remarks that he's sharper than expected for having noticed the frequent trips to the forest, but Shuri humbly replies that anyone would have noticed. Laughing, Kuga admits he gets so absorbed in his training that he often loses awareness of his surroundings. While Kuga doubts Shuri could solve his problems, Shuri suggests that simply talking about them might help ease the burden. After a moment of thought, Kuga agrees that talking might indeed lighten his load a little and accepts the offer. He looks at Shuri with a serious expression and plainly states that he is currently in a slump. Kuga explains his anxiety stems from watching Lil make significant contributions to the war effort with her inventions, while all he feels he can do is swing a sword. He can no longer just fall back on the idea that tools are important. He grips the hilt of his sword tightly, filled with a sense of conflict. His core belief is that it's wrong for tools to become more powerful than humans and that ultimately, one must rely on their own skill. Yet he laments that his own sword failed to achieve better results on the battlefield than Lil's explosive stones. He feels as though these new weapons suddenly came along and stole his position, filling him with anxiety. Faced with enemies that felt stronger and faster, the more he dwelled on his anxieties, the more his swordsmanship dulled. Shuri listens, realizing Kuga's problem is a matter of the heart. Fear and impatience created a vicious cycle of anxiety that further degraded his skill. He feels helpless, recognizing that as someone with no fighting experience, he has no real answers to offer and that just listening isn't a solution. Still, he closes his eyes and resolves that there must be something, anything, that even he can do for Kuga. An image from his old life flashes in his mind, someone calling his name while he worked as a cook. Suddenly, A brilliant idea strikes him. He calls out to get Kuga's attention. With a bright, confident smile, Shuri asks him a simple question, "Aren't you hungry?" Kuga looks up at him, utterly bewildered by the abrupt change of subject. Shuri insists that before anything else, they must fill his stomach, because worries only get worse on an empty one. A kitchen counter is shown, laden with bottles and a basket of eggs, as a voice from off-screen apologizes for the wait. Kuga looks on in surprise, commenting on the large amount of supplies Shuri has brought with him. Shuri announces his intention to make a late-night snack using horse mackerel, prompting Kuga to question if a fish dish isn't a bit too luxurious for this hour. Winking confidently, Shuri reassures him that Gungrave wouldn't get mad over a feast prepared for someone working hard to overcome their worries. Shuri lays out the main ingredients for the dish: horse mackerel, some pepper, and a special tartar sauce that he proudly made himself. The components of the tartar sauce are displayed, listing eggs, onions, mayonnaise, vinegar, salt, pepper, and parsley. A flashback shows the creation of the mayonnaise base, with Shuri reflecting on how tough it was to make from its ingredients of egg yolks, oil, vinegar, lemon juice, salt, and sugar. He recalls the process, noting that making mayonnaise requires patience, skill, and knowledge, as rushing the addition of oil will ruin the condiment. Now in the forest clearing, Shuri kneels before a cutting board, determined to prove that all the effort he poured into creating his mayonnaise and tartar sauce was not wasted. Kuga leans over a plate of whole fish and asks Shuri what he plans to do with them. Shuri replies that he is thinking of frying them, a suggestion that makes Kuga smile brightly as he exclaims that he also enjoys fried food. With a glint of light off its polished surface, Shuri holds up a sharp kitchen knife, ready to begin his work. While Kuga watches with intense focus, Shuri starts to prepare the horse mackerel by first removing the scales and then filleting it into 3 pieces. The careful and precise motions of the filleting process are shown in detail. He then meticulously removes the small bones from the fillet with a pair of tweezers, explaining that this is a necessary consideration for those who will be eating it. To ensure it can be enjoyed without any hassle, he sprinkles the prepared fillets with salt and drizzles them with ginger juice. Next, Shuri pulls out a special, box-like refrigerator that was made for him by Lil, commenting that she did an excellent job on it despite the trouble it gave her. He explains that it's a tool for keeping food cool that he had asked Lil to make, and that he paid her for the work with a large number of hamburger steaks. He places the seasoned fillets inside the device, stating that they will now need to wait for a moment. Kuga expresses his surprise, asking if Shuri isn't going to cook the fish right away, but Shuri confirms that the process requires a little bit of time. To help pass the time while they wait, Shuri produces a bottle of sake and offers some to Kuga. Kuga accepts the drink with a happy expression, remarking that having sake after practice is something truly special. Shuri asks if Kuga can discern the specific flavor of the sake, but Kuga simply replies with a smile that delicious sake is just delicious, regardless of the details. This prompts Kuga to ask if Shuri drinks much himself, and Shuri explains that as a chef, he avoids alcohol so as not to dull his palate. However, Shuri admits that sometimes he just wants to cut loose and relax, a sentiment Kuga agrees is simply part of being human. Shuri turns the tables, suggesting that perhaps Kuga should try letting loose for once to deal with his own stress. He elaborates on his advice, saying that when you're worried about something, it's sometimes best to stop thinking about it, refresh your body and mind, and only then approach the problem again. Shuri states his goal is to make it easier for Kuga to think about his worries, and he sincerely hopes that if Kuga can relax now, his problems will surely be resolved. To illustrate his point, Shuri begins to tell a story about his own time as a trainee. He recalls a period when he fell into despair, unable to master a certain task no matter how much he increased his training. In that moment of crisis, the master at his training place simply told him to drink well, sleep well, and then think about it, before making him drink a large amount of sake. After resting and feeling refreshed, despite a terrible hangover, Shuri realized that he had been overthinking things, which in turn was making his movements stiff and preventing his success. Kuga listens intently to Shuri's story, a look of quiet understanding on his face as Shuri smiles at the memory. This encourages Kuga to open up, admitting that he had been struggling to defeat enemies due to his smaller body size and had begun to believe he'd reached the limit of his talent. Shuri immediately rejects the idea, stating with conviction that there is no such thing as limits. He recalls Gungrave's words about how Kuga possessed the talent, skill, and unwavering effort needed to one day surpass even him. Shuri stares at Kuga with intensity, seeing the swordsman from his practice earlier in his mind's eye. Taken aback, Kuga asks how Shuri can brush aside his deep-seated fears with such simple words, but Shuri passionately pleads with him not to talk so sadly. His gaze is unwavering and full of determination. Shuri tells Kuga that his sword was genuinely beautiful to watch, that it drew a stunning arc through the air, and that he is not at a limit, but merely hitting a wall. He states that this is how he truly sees the situation, and because of that, he doesn't want Kuga to give up. Shuri continues, declaring that for someone with Kuga's potential, having talent is a duty. He believes that people like Kuga are meant to lead the way, to show dreams to those who lack talent, and to fascinate others with the way they live their lives. Kuga quietly repeats the words, "a wall," to himself, and a slow smile spreads across his face as the idea begins to sink in. Shuri glances at the sky and declares that it should be about time to finish what they started. He announces that they can now move on to the final touches of the meal. He begins the last steps of preparation by washing the chilled mackerel, patting it dry, and seasoning it once more with salt, pepper, and ginger juice. While oil heats to 160 degrees Celsius in a pot, he briefly fries the leaves of a sansho plant after removing their stems. He then prepares a tray of panko breadcrumbs by spraying them with water, letting them sit for 5 minutes, and then mixing in the fried sansho leaves. Next, he dips the mackerel fillets in a batter made of egg, flour, and water, before coating them thoroughly in the sansho panko mixture. He then raises the oil's temperature to 180 degrees, fries the fish skin side down for 1 minute, flips it to fry for another 20 seconds, and promptly removes it to drain. With the fish perfectly fried, he plates it and adds a generous helping of his homemade tartar sauce, declaring the dish complete. Kuga observes the finished plate, remarking that while it looks like a fried dish, he has never seen fish fried so beautifully before. Shuri presents the meal with a flourish, encouraging Kuga to enjoy it and noting that he added a bit of spicy mustard as a finishing touch. Kuga takes his first bite and closes his eyes, a blissful smile spreading across his face. His eyes fly open with delight as he exclaims that the dish is irresistible, the coating is crispy while the inside is fluffy, and the sweet and sour sauce perfectly complements the flavor of the sansho pepper. After a moment, the plate is completely empty, and Kuga lets out a sigh of deep satisfaction, which makes Shuri glad. Kuga compliments Shuri on his impressive knife skills, and Shuri agrees that it's an aspect of cooking he pays close attention to. Shuri explains that with fish, it's important to be delicate, as cutting it roughly can affect the flavor. One must gently glide the knife over the soft parts. A spark of realization ignites in Kuga's eyes, as if a bolt of lightning has just struck his mind. He declares that he was misunderstanding everything. With his physical build, relying on sheer strength is impossible, and he must use techniques to succeed. Thanking Shuri profusely, Kuga exclaims that he's had a breakthrough, realizing that skills and techniques are the foundation he needs to overcome his physical disadvantages. Shuri smiles, thinking to himself that this is what to expect from a genius, who is so different from an ordinary person. Re-energized by his epiphany, Kuga announces he will practice once more before bed and tells Shuri to go on ahead and get some sleep. He insists on being left alone to hold onto the feeling of his breakthrough, promising he will be back to normal by the next day, and Shuri reluctantly agrees. The following day, Shuri is happy to see a visibly refreshed Kuga waving to him with a bright, cheerful grin. In the battle that ensued, Kuga's performance was nothing short of legendary, leading his side to victory and causing an observer named Miral to comment that the true genius seemed to have reached a state of enlightenment. Armored knights on horseback begin their assault, the command to charge and attack ringing out. Their objective is clear as they ride across the field, to crush the enemy's vanguard. The cavalry bears down upon the opposing army's infantry line. Horses rear and weapons clash as the charge makes impact. Suddenly, knights are blown from their saddles, their assault thrown into disarray. The battlefield erupts in explosions, making it impossible for the cavalry to maintain their formation. A commander looks on in shock, questioning how many mages the enemy could have brought, as no such force was mentioned in their reports. On the opposing side, soldiers cheer at the power of their explosive stones, convinced of an easy victory, while Kuga watches them in silence. He reflects on his identity as Kuga, the captain of the 1st Infantry Unit in the Mercenary Corps. His role, a duty he considers an honor, is to be the first to charge the front lines and strike down the enemy. His subordinates share this pride, striving to be the hardest workers and highest earners in the Corps, second only to the mages. He has always wielded a single greatsword, a weapon he has used to defeat every opponent he has ever faced. The sword was his very essence on the battlefield, the place where his true talents shone, or at least, that's how it used to be. Everything changed when a girl named Lil began to blossom, her talents producing incredible creations like explosive stones and time-activated ignition stones. Even within his own unit, the soldiers were thrilled, believing these new weapons would allow them to defeat enemies with even greater ease. But as his men cheered for the new tools of war, Kuga found that he could not share in their happiness. He had always taken pride in his own strength, in defeating foes with his own weapon as he ran across the battlefield. A conflicting new thought began to surface. If using things like explosion stones is enough to secure victory, then that should be perfectly fine. He immediately shuts down this line of thinking, telling himself that such a belief is not good. He traces the origins of his swordsmanship to his past as a resident of the slums, where he, Gungrave, and others survived together in a filthy environment. From childhood, he was forged in combat, training alongside adults as a guard and bodyguard, accumulating a lifetime of experience in fights to the death. But Gungrave was different. A rare genius who could face him in a real duel and master the very swordsmanship Kuga had spent years perfecting with just a single look. Now that Gungrave is the captain, Kuga feels a duty to protect him from the front lines. He resolved to be the first to charge, to use his sword to pave Gungrave's path to glory and fulfill his friend's dream. But now, in the face of new warfare, his sword feels as though it has become dull. He grew anxious trying to achieve better results to keep up with the new tools, and this hesitation filled his sword with doubt, throwing his body off balance. He began to wonder if this struggle represented the true limit of his talent. The memory of an argument with his men surfaces, beginning with him shouting for a subordinate to repeat what he just said. The soldier timidly suggests that it would be more effective to focus on using explosion stones rather than training with the sword, which causes Kuga to grab him in anger. Kuga screams at his troops, reminding them that they are soldiers. He passionately asks them if fighting with their own strength and swords is not their sworn duty. One of his men argues back that the reality is they are achieving results more safely and efficiently, but Kuga cuts him off, turning his back on them. He stands apart from his unit, his expression grim and conflicted. This is why, for days now, he has been training alone in the forest after meals. With a battle looming in a few days, he feels a desperate need to regain both his confidence and his skill with the sword. He begins a session of what he calls mirror training. Through extreme concentration, he creates an illusory enemy to fight against, an ideal version of himself. The duel begins in a blur of motion and blinding speed. The two figures, one real and one an illusion, move faster than the eye can follow. Their swords clash with furious intensity, parrying and striking in rapid succession. They lock blades, their faces inches apart, eyes burning with concentration. The deadly dance continues as the real Kuga battles his perfect, illusory self. The illusion, wreathed in a fiery aura, proves too powerful, and Kuga admits to himself that it's no good. As the illusion fades, he stands defeated, concluding that everything is a failure because his wavering heart caused his sword to falter. He begins to think deeply, trying to understand the true reason his sword has dulled. He questions his own hesitation, acknowledging that they should use tools if they make victory easier, but then realizes his men have become too reliant on them, neglecting their training and losing their pride as infantry soldiers. His true fear is that his comrades will die helpless and filled with regret in a critical situation where tools are not available. He questions whether, at the moment of death, they would wish for more explosion stones or regret not having honed their own swordsmanship to the point where they might have survived. He knows that dying with regret is a terrifying fate he cannot stand for his men. He resolves that he must show them that, in the end, the only thing a soldier can truly rely on is their own strength. His purpose renewed, he begins to walk through the forest, leaving his training ground behind. He stops abruptly, sensing another's presence nearby, and calls out into the darkness, asking who is standing there. Shuri stands in the forest clearing holding a lantern, apologizing for startling Kuga and identifying himself. Kuga turns, asking what's wrong with Shuri and telling him not to scare him like that. Kuga begins an internal monologue, reflecting that since the cook Shuri joined their group a month ago, his delicious food has made mealtimes far more cheerful. Despite this, he admits to himself that he still can't completely shake off a lingering distrust of Shuri. He still wonders why Shuri's group suddenly appeared at Bell Hill that day, as the true reason remains a mystery. The origins of Shuri's unfamiliar dishes and his cooking training are also unanswered questions that fuel Kuga's suspicion. He decides not to voice these concerns for now, remembering the defeated look on Shuri's face when he asked what was wrong. Kuga recalls Shuri explaining that he had simply been curious about Kuga's nightly trips into the forest and had decided to follow him. The fact that even Shuri had noticed his troubles made Kuga realize he still had a long way to go as a leader. He remembers sitting on the forest floor with Shuri and admitting that he was in a slump. Encouraged by Shuri's simple suggestion that just talking might help, Kuga had decided to open up. He had explained his belief that while tools are important, one must ultimately rely on their own skills, and lamented that his sword couldn't achieve better results than an explosive stone. He had planned to speak calmly, but once he started venting about his anxieties of needing to be stronger and faster, he found he couldn't stop. The thoughts had poured out of him all at once, ending with the admission that his sword had begun to feel dull. It was then that he realized the truth. He was weak, made anxious by the successes of his own comrades. He confessed his jealousy of Lil's achievements, feeling like she had stolen his thunder, and acknowledged what a pathetic person he was being. Just as he was wallowing in this self-pity, Shuri had spoken up with a single, simple sentence. With a bright smile, Shuri had asked, "Kuga-san, aren't you hungry?" leaving Kuga completely stunned. Kuga reflects on that moment, wondering if Shuri was treating his deep worries as if he were just a hungry child, but also acknowledging that not even the brilliant Gungrave could have devised such a solution. He finds it strange that Shuri's simple words made his worries feel pointless, and wonders if this is just another facet of Shuri's remarkable personality. He remembers watching Shuri cook with a confident ease, his knife work so refined it was like watching a master wield a legendary sword. He recalls Shuri placing the prepared fish into a special container, explaining they would have to wait a bit. While they waited, Shuri had offered him some sake, an offer Kuga happily accepted. Kuga thinks back on their conversation, how Shuri explained he couldn't offer advice but just wanted him to relax so he could work through his worries, and now he understands. He has come to realize that Shuri is a smart and good person, someone with the experience to empathize with the troubles of others. The thought that he had doubted someone like Shuri for so long now makes his conscience hurt. He feels a pang of guilt for only viewing Shuri with suspicion instead of trying to empathize, despite Shuri having earned Gungrave's trust and getting along with Lil. Kuga admits he had dismissed Shuri as an ordinary person, kind but not strong, smart but without combat skill. He remembers telling Shuri that he had come to believe his talents were limited. It was the one thing he never wanted to say out loud, that he thought his physical build meant he lacked the natural talent for swordsmanship, even as he grew stronger with every deadly battle. That hard-won strength was his pride, but the concept of limits had begun to erode it. He remembers Shuri's plea not to simplify his struggle with such a sad word. Shuri had insisted that Kuga's sword was beautiful, that he wasn't at his limit, but was simply hitting a wall. The memory of those words makes Kuga's eyes widen with emotion. He reflects that a sword is a tool for killing, and his own hands are stained with the blood of many. For someone to call his bloody sword beautiful, of all things, and to reframe his struggle as merely hitting a wall, Kuga decides that perhaps he should trust Shuri's words and reconsider his situation from this new perspective. If his sword has truly hit a wall, then there must be a way to break through it, a technique or method to overcome it. He concludes it must be something he has overlooked, something within himself that he failed to notice. He is pulled from his deep thoughts by Shuri announcing that the food should be ready now. Shuri smiles as he finishes the preparations with practiced skill. He presents the finished fried mackerel dish to Kuga, announcing that it is done. The first bite is an explosion of flavor, the contrast between the crispy coating and the fluffy fish being beyond imagination. Kuga exclaims that the dish is irresistible, praising the texture and the perfect pairing of the tangy sauce with the spiced mountain pepper. Even after finishing the incredible meal, Kuga compliments Shuri's knife skills, prompting Shuri to describe his technique as slicing as if gently stroking the soft parts. The phrase, stroking and slicing, triggers an epiphany in Kuga. He realizes his mindset was always focused on using brute force to overcome physically larger foes. He now understands that this is not his path. He possesses a swordsmanship unique to him, something only he can do. He has survived countless life-or-death struggles not through brute force, but through the technique rooted deep within him. After this flash of inspiration, Kuga thanks Shuri and sends him back to camp before drawing his own sword once more. He reflects that where he once swung his sword using only the strength of his arms, he will now wield it with his entire body. He visualizes power generating from his legs, knees, hips, shoulders, arms, and wrists, all flowing seamlessly into the sword as one fluid motion. He realizes that muscle alone is not enough. He must also use his bones and master the balance of his entire body, Taking complete control of it all, Kuga once again begins his mirror training, facing the fiery, illusory double of his ideal self. With a burst of speed, both figures lunge forward, their feet kicking up dust. As the illusion raises its sword to strike, Kuga questions what exactly this opponent represents. He realizes the figure before him is his former ideal, a concept he idolized without truly acting upon it, and their blades clash with tremendous force. Kuga's sword unleashes a powerful wave of energy that overwhelms the illusion. The impact is so great that his sword is jolted from his grasp, and he grunts in pain. He feels the shock surpass the limits of his grip, thinking his wrist had been blown off as numbness spreads through his shoulder and elbow. His gaze follows the trajectory of his weapon across the clearing. The sword that flew from his hand has embedded itself more than halfway through a thick tree trunk. A wide grin spreads across Kuga's face and he begins to laugh, realizing with elation that Shuri was right. It was never a limit, just a wall he needed to break through. That night, he swung his sword tirelessly, feeling as if he had grown not just one step stronger, but 10 or even dozens of steps in a single night. He practiced until morning, only to be met by a worried Shuri who proceeded to lecture him endlessly. Kuga reflects that Shuri's calm smile while scolding him was actually quite frightening. The memory fades as Shuri asks if his problem was solved, and Kuga winks, confirming with a smile that it was, thanks to him. The scene shifts to a new day and a new battle, as a cavalry of enemy knights charges forward. An enemy commander shouts for his troops to prepare their explosive stones as the opposing army approaches. Ignoring his subordinates' pleas that it's reckless, Kuga charges out alone to meet the enemy vanguard, while a woman watches from afar, realizing something profound in that moment. Enemy archers draw their bows, taking aim at the lone warrior, as Kuga thinks to himself that his sword has now gained something new. As the command to fire is given, he completes the thought. His sword now has two faces. A volley of arrows soars through the air, heading straight for him. In a stunning display of speed and skill, he deflects every single projectile, a technique he calls the gentle sword of his awakened state. His men watch from the rear, their mouths agape in disbelief as the arrows fall harmlessly around their captain. The other face of his swordsmanship is revealed as he closes the distance with the enemy cavalry. This is the sword that represents all the brute power he had possessed up until now. He unleashes his strong sword, cleaving a knight and his mount in two with a single, devastating strike. Through his newfound calmness and body control, his attack speed and reflexes have increased beyond all comparison to before. He becomes a whirlwind of destruction, cutting down enemy after enemy. His troops can only watch in awe, amazed that their captain is capable of fighting on such a level. Back at camp that night, a cheer erupts from the victorious soldiers. They celebrate another great victory, proclaiming that it was all thanks to the incredible Captain Kuga. His subordinates approach him while he eats, bowing deeply as they apologize for all the impudent things they had said before. One of them humbly, if presumptuously, asks if Kuga would be willing to teach them swordsmanship, a request that makes Kuga pause mid-bite. He swallows his food, considering their request. A gentle smile forms on his face as he closes his eyes, thinking that teaching them might not be so bad after all. A narrator explains that military power is indispensable for maintaining the kingdom. However, in the 10 years since the unified kingdom's founding, many martial arts and sword techniques have declined, leaving only two major schools remaining. One of these is the Kuga style, founded by a hero known as the sword saint, Kuga Yanagi. When this sword technique was first demonstrated, its lethality was so great that it was considered a feat unimaginable for a mere human. The site of this event became known as the Blood Garden, a field where the plants were said to be dyed red from a massacre, though the truth of the tale is uncertain. Kuga Yanagi, a man who possessed such terrifying power, was a complex figure. Even as the supreme commander of the unified kingdom, he fought on the front lines, defeating enemies and reportedly taking great joy in inspiring his comrades. While his actions emboldened his subordinates, they often left his friends exasperated with his recklessness. He later said that in those early days, he felt as though there were only corpses behind him on the battlefield. It was a friend who made him realize that behind him were also the thousands and tens of thousands of lives he had saved. This realization became his reason for fighting at the front, to be the first one out and act as a shield for everyone else. This philosophy was named the life-giving sword, a sword that kills one to save many, and was eventually reinterpreted in modern times as a non-killing sword that suppresses without killing. Kuga Yanagi's life became the subject of plays and stories, and he was eventually deified, revered by all as the sword god. After retiring, he became a kindly old man who enjoyed fishing and other hobbies, spending his days chatting with the king and his old comrades. On those peaceful days, he was known to always eat fried horse mackerel. Even in his advanced age, he remained a hearty eater, his wrinkled face always beaming with a smile as he filled his mouth with his favorite dish. The scene returns to the present day, with the current Kuga smiling happily as he eats among his subordinates, while Shuri looks on from the background. A tray laden with fried shrimp and tartar sauce is passed around, a feast for the victorious and newly inspired soldiers. The battlefield is a chaotic mess of clashing swords and warring soldiers. A commander named Gungrave, shocked to encounter the enemy in this location, orders his troops to hold the line and not retreat. Another soldier urgently tells Shuri to get out of there, and Shuri, clutching a large pot, nervously agrees to flee. He watches as a squad of soldiers begins to move out toward the fight. His eyes widen in realization as he identifies them as the mage unit. A powerful magical energy is suddenly unleashed upon the battlefield. One of the mages points her staff and sends a torrent of black fire screaming toward the enemy ranks. The enemy soldiers are instantly consumed by the flames, their bodies burning as they reach out in agony. Shuri watches the carnage unfold, horrified by the brutal power of the magic. The scene transitions to a vast, snow-covered forest and mountain range. Time has passed, and the weather has grown colder, forcing soldiers to huddle around a campfire for warmth. Shuri brings the audience up to date on the Gungrave Mercenary Corps' new situation in the frigid landscape. The war over salt rights has officially ended, and as a result, the Mercenary Corps secured a large reward of coins, supplies, and provisions. Gungrave was overjoyed by their payment, excited by the prospect of reinforcing his troops and upgrading their equipment, though he regretfully informs a crying Shuri that they won't be hiring a cooking assistant anytime soon. Shuri is shocked when Gungrave explains that his cooking techniques are too difficult to pass on to others and that there's some resistance to it. The Mercenary Corps now finds itself in an even colder region, fighting a new war, this time over plain and simple mineral resources. The resource in contention is an iron ore capable of producing high-quality steel, a reminder that conflicts over resources are a constant throughout any era. Shuri, bundled in winter clothing, shivers and comments on the freezing cold before turning to ask Lil if she's alright. To his horror, he sees that Lil has been frozen solid by the extreme temperature. He quickly presses a warm drink into her hands. He explains that it's amazake, a sweet type of sake that he prepared. Lil takes a sip and notes that it's sweet but doesn't taste like alcohol. Shuri clarifies that it technically still contains alcohol, so she should limit herself to just 1 cup. His narration explains that the amazake is made from sake leaves, a material he had to beg Gungrave to procure for him from a world that has its own versions of Japanese sake. He prepared it specifically for emergencies like this, knowing the small amount of alcohol would help warm the body without creating a problem with drunken soldiers. As Lil happily sips the warm drink, Shuri thinks to himself that her way of drinking it is adorable. The sight of the delicious-looking beverage immediately attracts the attention of other soldiers, who ask to try some as well. One of these soldiers is Teg-san, the friendly, dreadlocked captain of the archery unit, and Shuri offers him a cup. Teg-san eagerly gulps down the warm drink. He lets out a sigh of pure bliss, declaring the warm, sweet and smooth drink to be the best he's ever had. When Shuri tells him he can only have 1 cup because of the alcohol, Teg-san is dismayed that he didn't savor it more, but Lil promises Shuri will make more after the war. Immediately after, Lil begins demanding a hamburger, completely ignoring Shuri's point that she already ate a ton of them before. Her eyes sparkle with an intense craving as she declares that hamburgers are always delicious, no matter when you eat them. Teg-san nervously remarks that Lil's eyes look a bit scary, and Shuri deadpans that she is probably not okay. Shuri's attention is drawn to a group of the other captains having a discussion nearby. He notes that Gungrave is also drinking amazake, but his narration clarifies that the commander's version is non-alcoholic, made from rice koji to ensure he remains sober. He reflects that getting the rice koji was a huge ordeal, as the mold is a treasured secret of sake breweries. He wonders what the captains are discussing, guessing it's a strategy meeting related to the enemy being accustomed to fighting in snowy terrain. As he watches, he notices one of the captains, a woman with long, blonde hair, looking directly at him. He points this out to Teg-san and asks why he, as a captain, isn't also in the meeting with the other high-ranking officers. Teg-san just scratches his head and cheerfully admits that he's not very good at thinking and prefers to leave that sort of thing to Gungrave. Lil chimes in that she feels the same way, prompting Shuri to feel a wave of sympathy for the ever-burdened Gungrave. The other captains, including Aureus, Kaguya, and Ultros, continue their serious discussion. The meeting eventually concludes with the decision to rest for the remainder of the day and begin their advance the following morning. Later, Shuri finds himself washing a mountain of dishes in the freezing cold water. He mutters to himself about how rough it is to be washing dishes in this weather. A voice from behind him asks if he has a moment. He turns to see Aureus-sen, the captain of the mages. Shuri internally identifies her as the leader of the Mage Corps and a true magic specialist. He muses that if Lil's power is magical engineering, then Aureus's ability is natural manipulation. He recalls once seeing her mercilessly drop a 1-meter-wide fireball on the enemy, which is the kind of person he knows her to be. He also acknowledges that she is an absolute, stunning beauty. In his opinion, if she were on Earth, she would be scouted for a career in show business in an instant. His internal monologue then adds, twice, that her chest is completely flat. For one last bit of emphasis, he thinks, flat as a board, before defensively adding that he's a fan of flat chests and there's nothing wrong with that. He wonders why Aureus is seeking him out now. He honestly doesn't think she likes him very much, as she's been consistently cold toward him since he arrived. While he has managed to get along with her subordinates, Aureus herself has shown him no fondness whatsoever. In fact, more than anything else, she almost always seems to be glaring at him whenever she looks his way. He concludes that in her eyes, he must still be a suspicious newcomer of unknown origins. Just as she tells him she needs to have a talk with him, Aureus fidgets nervously with her fingers. She continues to fidget, her face flushed, as a shocked Shuri looks on. Shuri is bewildered by her sudden bashful and fidgety behavior, questioning the strange atmosphere between them. With a look of sudden determination, Aureus asks him directly to teach her how to cook. Shuri thinks to himself that he could have guessed her request, but he still asks her for what purpose she wants to learn. He already knows the answer. Aureus-san is in love with Gungrave-san. It's a fact anyone would recognize instantly from the soft, blooming smile she sometimes gives only to him. Her crush is an open secret within the mercenary group, with everyone watching over the two of them with quiet, lukewarm support. She believes she is hiding her feelings well, but the only person who remains completely oblivious is the incredibly dense Gungrave himself. Shuri brings himself back to the present and asks Aureus if she has any prior cooking experience, to which she quietly admits she has none. He explains that while he doesn't mind teaching, cooking isn't something that can be learned overnight, and Aureus's face falls with disappointment. Shuri muses that although simple dishes exist, there is no true shortcut to learning the art of cooking. He then asks why she has this sudden interest, and she nervously asks if he can keep it a secret, a request Shuri internally scoffs at. Aureus then confesses with a deep blush that she is in love with Gungrave, a fact that Shuri mentally confirms everyone already knows. He sighs, feeling a surge of murderous jealousy at the sight of a beautiful woman falling for a handsome man. Aureus explains that her jealousy was sparked by seeing how much Gungrave has been enjoying Shuri's cooking lately. Shuri is momentarily horrified by the thought that she might think there's a romantic element between him and Gungrave, quickly dismissing the idea. Aureus continues, saying that if she could also prepare meals for Gungrave, perhaps he would notice her more. She laments that even though she is the person closest to him, she feels unable to do anything for him and just wants to be useful to him in some way. Hearing this, Shuri's perception of her begins to change. He realizes that beneath the rival he was once scared of is a compassionate person who simply wants to help the one she loves. This new understanding makes him ponder her situation more deeply. He considers that everyone has their own battlefield. His is the kitchen, while hers is the actual field of war. He asks her directly, if she wants to be useful to Gungrave, wouldn't it be better to excel on the battlefield where she shines the most, rather than forcing herself onto a new one? Shuri clarifies that while he doesn't mind teaching her, she is a fighter with a rare talent for magic, the one who can defeat the most enemies. He pushes further, asking if there isn't a deeper reason for someone like her to suddenly seek usefulness in a completely different arena. Aureus admits that she has recently fallen into a slump, a confession that surprises Shuri and reminds him of what happened with Kuga. She explains that despite her continued training, she has hit a wall and stopped improving, with neither her firepower nor her magic control getting any better. With a look of resignation, she states her belief that she has reached the limits of her talent. This is why she wanted to learn a new skill, to find a different way to contribute to Gungrave's cause. Shuri understands that she wants to expand her capabilities because she feels she is no longer useful, but he cannot ignore her mention of a talent limit. He tells her that while magic is outside his expertise, learning to cook would take at least a month or two, making it an unlikely solution for helping Gungrave in the immediate future. He then adds that while he can't help with her magic, he can help with matters of the heart, a statement that startles Orius. She grabs him in excitement, asking if he really can help her. To confirm a suspicion, Shuri asks if she has ever had a meal alone with Gungrave. Blushing deeply, Orius admits that she has not. Shuri declares a plan. They will use this opportunity to arrange a private dinner for just the two of them, complete with a special dish to deepen their relationship. Orius's eyes sparkle with excitement as she asks if such a magical dish truly exists. He explains that in his hometown, there's a special meal eaten with close friends and loved ones, and the current cold season provides the perfect setting for it. When Orius asks if Shuri will be joining them, he tells her to simply think of him as part of the background. Later that evening, Gungrave arrives at the designated spot, asking if he was called there for a dinner invitation. Shuri, acting as a host, confirms this and gestures for his two guests to take their seats inside a specially prepared tent. Inside, a table has been elegantly set for two, with a hot pot at its center. The pot, filled with water and a piece of kelp, simmers gently over a portable stove. Shuri explains that he had Lil quickly set up the private tent and has prepared a ponzu-like sauce to accompany the meal. Gungrave expresses his surprise that Shuri will be cooking right in front of them, and Shuri announces that the preparation will now begin. He then notices Orius glaring at him and internally despairs, realizing she still suspects a romantic element between him and Gungrave. Shuri explains that the broth is already prepared, and the dish requires just a little more work to be finished. He adds cubes of tofu to the simmering broth, introducing the dish as yudofu, or hot tofu. He privately reflects on the ingredients. The excellent broth is thanks to high-quality kelp he bought in a seaside town. The tofu itself is freshly made, created using nigiri that he painstakingly extracted from soybeans. This nigiri was produced using a traditional Japanese large kettle method. The process required him to first collect seawater and then have Lil craft the necessary tools for extraction. It was a long process of trial and error, but he finally managed to succeed. The cost of Lil's assistance was a ridiculous amount of hamburger steaks, which nearly depleted their meat stock. Gungrave and Orius look at the simple pot of tofu, asking with some confusion if that's all there is to the meal. Shuri explains that while one can add many ingredients, for this particular meal, simple is best. He adds that it's a dish best enjoyed in cold weather, as the tofu retains heat and will warm them up from the inside out. When Gungrave asks if he is going to serve it, Shuri smiles and says he will not be involved from this point on. The main task is left to the two of them. He then presents them with a single, large slotted spoon. Shuri explains that the true charm of a hot pot meal is that it is shared, with those eating serving each other from the same pot, just like close friends, family, or loved ones. He gives Orius a knowing wink, and a look of realization dawns on her face. Orius turns to Gungrave and shyly offers to serve him, an offer which he accepts with a smile. Blushing with happiness, Orius carefully ladles some of the hot tofu into Gungrave's bowl. Gungrave blushes and offers to serve Orius a portion in return, leaving her flustered and surprised. The two smile warmly at each other, sharing a pleasant moment as they eat together. Watching them, Shuri smiles to himself, thinking that he likes this atmosphere and that it's exactly what he was aiming for. He reflects that serving food for one another and deepening bonds is one of the inherent effects of hot pot cuisine. Shuri warns Gungrave to be careful with the hot tofu, but he eats it too quickly and reacts to the heat inside. Gungrave exclaims that the dish is delicious, surprised that something so simple could taste so good, noting how the hot, soft tofu and tangy broth warm his chilled body. Shuri is glad they're both surprised, explaining that yudofu is a dish that warms the body from the inside out, making it perfect for cold seasons. He then offers them a topping, sprinkling a red powder onto the tofu and calling it a magical seasoning that adds an accent to the flavor. Gungrave tastes it and immediately recognizes the spiciness that follows the sourness, identifying it as chili pepper. Shuri then presents two more condiments, plates of green onions and grated daikon radish, inviting them to add the toppings as they please. Orius enjoys the aroma of the green onions and the refreshing spiciness of the grated daikon, prompting Gungrave to try the combination as well. Orius then asks Gungrave to pass her the chili pepper, and he happily obliges while Shuri watches with a satisfied smile. He observes that the distance between them seems to have shrunk, concluding that they were always close, but Orius's worries had created an artificial barrier. Deciding it's time for one last push, he gets Gungrave's attention and asks him what would happen if the hot pot had no kelp. Gungrave initially says it would taste the same, but Shuri insists the taste would be drastically different. Using a scientific diagram, Shuri explains that the subtle umami from the supporting roll kelp dissolves into the broth, blending with the star of the dish tofu to create the full flavor. He states that without it, the dish would be bland and lack depth, just as their own lively conversation might have been dull without a key element. He continues the analogy, saying it's the same with people, and pointedly asks Gungrave who it is that adds depth to him, the protagonist. Shuri prompts him further, asking if there isn't someone precious who is always by his side, thinking of and worrying about him. A blush creeps across Gungrave's face as he finally understands, looking toward Orius and asking if it could be her. Orius blushes deeply and confirms his realization with a quiet, heartfelt yes. Shuri smiles, announcing that his job is done and that the third wheel will now make a quiet exit. As he walks away, he congratulates himself on his successful matchmaking but then immediately laments his own long-standing single status. His thoughts are interrupted as he bumps into someone waiting just outside the tent. He is shocked to find the other captains and many of the mercenaries gathered there, having apparently listened in on the whole thing. He realizes that all of them were there, watching the private dinner unfold. When he asks if they were just watching, one of them smirks and asks how they could possibly stay quiet during something so entertaining. Kagaya admits they've been enjoying the love story, though Kuga says he thought it might be better to stop them from eavesdropping. Teg-san complains that's not fair, as even Kuga had claimed a duty to witness the event, while Lil says she doesn't care either way. Asagi teases Lil for lying, and Ultros points out that Lil was the first to declare this was necessary for life experience. Shuri realizes that it's not just simple curiosity that has kept them all here. He understands that of course they would be anxious about the outcome for two longtime companions who are finally getting together. He tells the group they can stay as long as they don't interfere, and as they promise not to get in the way, he makes his exit. The next morning, Shuri stands outside in the cold, blowing on his shaking hands. A voice wishes him a good morning. He turns to see Orius approaching, looking as if she is sparkling with a newfound radiance. Shuri is taken aback by her transformation, exclaiming that she looks absolutely radiant. She turns away shyly, a happy blush on her face. She thanks Shuri, explaining that because of him, she was finally able to confess her feelings, and now she and Gungrave are together. Shuri is shocked by the word, together, his mind immediately jumping to a conclusion. He imagines a scandalous scene of the two of them in bed last night. Orius clarifies that as wandering mercenaries with no home, they can't get engaged yet, but they have vowed to become husband and wife someday when they finally find land of their own. Shuri reels back and forcefully punches himself in the face. Orius is startled and asks what he is doing, to which he replies that he is purifying his impure heart with a punch. With a bruised and swollen cheek, Shuri formally tells her that he has gladly received her thanks. He confirms with her that they plan to officially marry once they settle down somewhere, and she affirms it. Shuri reflects that for a mercenary group to settle down is no ordinary feat, but he believes these two can achieve it. He smiles, thinking that while he used to wish for all happy couples to just explode, it's different when it's his close friends finding happiness. After some more light-hearted conversation, he and Orius part ways. He recalls that she had asked him about the science behind Yudofu, and he had shared some simple trivia with her. He then learned that in the battle that followed their dinner, they were victorious. Apparently, Orius went on a complete rampage, with some soldiers ridiculously rumoring that she had created a sun in the middle of the battlefield. Gungrave lies critically wounded on a stretcher as his comrades shout his name in panic. Shuri frantically calls for Kagaya, demanding cloth and hot water to stop the bleeding. Orius cradles Gungrave, who weakly asks if everyone is safe. She reassures him that they all managed to escape the enemy. He manages a faint smile, expressing his gladness that his people are safe. Tears well up in Orius's eyes as she looks at her wounded commander. Her internal monologue begins, reflecting on the fact that she has someone she loves. She thinks back to their past as orphans in a gang, where Gungrave always led them, even as they stole and hurt others just to survive. He took on all their sins so they wouldn't be consumed by guilt, and she resolved to stand by his side to share that burden. It was a little while after they formed the mercenary group, when he nearly died on a mission, that she finally realized her feelings for him were love. That particular battle, a retreat where they were assigned to the rear guard, became the worst in their history. Though they succeeded in the retreat, it came at a great cost, leaving many dead and wounded, including their commander. The survivors were crushed by self-loathing, believing their incompetence was the reason Gungrave hovered between life and death. But even then, in his critical state, he smiled and thanked them simply for having survived. Seeing his smile in that moment of despair was when Aureus finally and fully realized that she loved him. Her thoughts return to the present as she introduces herself. Aureus, the commander of the Gungrave Mercenary Corps' mage unit. She explains that magic is a powerful weapon on the battlefield, making mages a formidable threat. By harnessing mana, they can rain fireballs upon the enemy, shield allies with walls of ice, and cut down foes with blades of wind. Mages possess the rare aptitude to interfere with the material world, transforming mana into whatever materials they desire. However, very few people are born with the talent to manipulate mana. Most, like Lil, can only affect existing objects, becoming magic engineers or artificers. Only 1 in 100,000 can manipulate mana, and even fewer of those can become true mages, yet their small core has 4 of these rare talents. This is a primary reason why they rarely lose a battle, but it's also why their mercenary group has not grown very large. Simply put, their personnel costs are sky-high because mages are in high demand and can easily join other armies for better pay. It has been a tough balancing act, but Aureus has convinced her unit to accept modest wages for the sake of her and Gungrave's dreams. Lately, however, her subordinates have stopped complaining about their low pay. The reason for this sudden change in morale is Shuri. Her mages are now happy because, thanks to him, they eat gourmet food every day that they couldn't get anywhere else, and some even claim their health and spell accuracy have improved. They are so satisfied with his cooking that they've stopped eating out altogether, which they consider a net financial gain. Aureus admits to herself that without Shuri, her squad might have fallen apart long ago. Her thoughts then shift to the upcoming battle, which is expected to take place in the difficult, snowy terrain. She approaches her subordinates' tent and finds them in the middle of a meal. Smelling alcohol, she angrily scolds them for drinking in broad daylight without permission, asking what they would do if a battle broke out. The 3 young mages stare back at her, stunned into silence. One of them explains that it's a drink called amazake made by Shuri, and while it's technically alcohol, the content is extremely low. Her subordinates enthusiastically praise the drink, saying it's sweet, warms the body without getting you drunk, and even makes their skin smooth. They happily conclude that it's good for both their health and beauty, calling Shuri a mage in his own right. Aureus feels a headache coming on as her squad celebrates how lucky they are to have Shuri with them. As she walks away, she reflects that the entire mood of the Corps has started to shift ever since his arrival. She realizes that in the past, a confrontation like the one she just had would have ended in a fight, but her subordinates responded calmly and maturely. She sees the positive changes in everyone, Gungrave focusing on logistics, Lil inventing new tech inspired by Shuri, and Kuga reaching a new level of skill. Watching them all walk together, she can't help but feel like she's the only one being left behind, a realization that makes her feel lonely. Nearby, other soldiers enjoy the amazake, remarking that they'll have stronger booze back in town, though the current drink is tasty. Aureus overhears them praising Shuri's incredible influence, and she feels a conflicting mix of gratitude and jealousy toward him. He remains far too suspicious. He joined them suddenly and has already earned everyone's trust, yet they still know nothing about where he comes from. She realizes it is because of these jealous and suspicious thoughts that her gaze toward Shuri becomes sharp and hostile, and she worries he might hate her for it. She stands alone amidst the bustling activity of the snowy military camp. Her thoughts are interrupted when she sees Gungrave drinking amazake, and she rushes over to him in a panic. Her eyes are wide with concern. She scolds him, asking what would happen if the commander got drunk when they could be called into negotiations at any moment. Gungrave calmly explains that the amazake he's drinking is a different kind. He tells her he turned down the alcoholic version because he couldn't afford to smell of booze, so Shuri made him a special non-alcoholic version that tastes just as good. Gungrave sips his drink happily, saying it's even tastier because it took more effort to make and it still warms him up. He then offers a cup to Aureus, telling her that Shuri made this one for her. She takes a sip and finds it sweet and warming, with barely any alcohol taste. As the other soldiers and Gungrave happily drink their respective versions, Aureus feels a sense of contentment spread through the camp. But despite the warmth of the drink, she bites her lip, thinking to herself that it's frustrating. She believes that Gungrave simply liking Shuri is not the same as the trust required in the heat of battle, and right now, the one he trusts to watch his back is Shuri. It is a profound trust, one that means entrusting someone to walk beside him on his path to power. She can't help but be jealous of the man who works behind the scenes, standing at Gungrave's side. She is jealous of the one who is gaining the trust of the man she cares for so deeply. A deep sigh escapes Orius as she closes her eyes, overwhelmed by a feeling of restlessness. She walks through the snowy camp, reflecting that while the day's meal and amazake were perfect, she wishes she could cook dishes like that, wondering if it would help her grow closer to Gungrave. As she ponders this, a sudden exclamation escapes another woman in the camp, startling Orius from her thoughts. An idea sparks within her, bringing a brilliant smile to her face. If she can learn to cook, she too can be of use to Gungrave. She imagines being praised like another woman, Orius, who is told she is needed while a soldier exclaims how delicious her food is. This new path feels vital, as she has recently hit a wall with her magical abilities and has been struggling to improve. With renewed purpose, she decides there's no time like the present. She will be honest about everything, ask for forgiveness, and have him teach her how to cook. She scans the camp and quickly spots him standing over stacks of plates. To her surprise, she finds Shuri washing dishes alone in the biting cold, prompting her to question where the assigned cook is. Her thoughts are interrupted by an officer announcing that the march is set for tomorrow, ordering everyone to rest and restore their strength for the coming day. Indeed, in preparation for the march, all the other members of the group are shown resting inside a tent, either sleeping or quietly maintaining their gear. Orius realizes this is why Shuri is washing the dishes alone. No one can be allowed to waste energy or risk their hands going numb on such work right now. She silently watches him from a distance, a pensive look on her face. She understands that he handles all the cooking and washing by himself, and his hands must be covered in painful cracks from the labor. Even though the number of soldiers is increasing, Shuri remains the only official cook because he doesn't fight. Orius recognizes that Gungrave must have his reasons, but at this rate, the burden on Shuri is becoming enormous. She reflects on her own behavior with shame. Compared to his hard work, she just eats his food, drinks his sake, and gets jealous of his usefulness, all while planning a convenient apology. A wave of self-loathing washes over her, making her want to punch herself for being so pathetic, but she clenches her fists, resolving to speak to him with courage. She approaches Shuri from behind and asks if she can talk to him for a moment, causing him to turn with a start. Steeling herself, she decides she will not resent a man who works so hard without complaint. Instead, she will apologize for everything and try to believe in him. After she makes her request, Shuri's voice echoes over a view of the vast mountain range, questioning her desire to learn cooking. Orius recalls the moment, noting that when she explained she wanted to learn cooking for Gungrave, Shuri's response was completely unexpected. He advised her that everyone has their own battlefield, and it is best to fight where she shines the most rather than forcing herself to fight elsewhere. His honest and straightforward words pierced deep into her heart, making her realize just how sincere and genuine he truly is. She understands now that he is a kind person, and she simply hadn't been willing to see it before. It reminds her of a time she gathered the courage to confess her love for Gungrave, only for Shuri to give her a knowing look that she couldn't comprehend. Seeing his earnest attitude now, she admits that she has been in a slump lately, ending up blurting out her own weakness. She confesses that despite constant training, she feels no improvement in her magic, can't control it on the battlefield anymore, and at this rate, she won't be able to stay by Gungrave's side. Shuri listens and then states that magic is outside his area of expertise, so he can't offer any advice on that particular problem. He then smiles brightly, raising a finger and declaring that while he can't help with magic, he can definitely help with love, leaving Orius momentarily confused. The solution Shuri proposed was a private dinner with Gungrave, just the two of them. This was a significant suggestion, as Gungrave had a long-standing rule from his gang days to always eat meals together with everyone, meaning he had never eaten alone with someone before. Shuri quickly and efficiently prepared everything, putting immense effort into someone else's love life and making Orius think what a rare and kind-hearted person he is. He presents the dish, identifying it as yudofu, and though its preparation was simple, Orius's wide eyes show she finds it incredibly delicious. As she and Gungrave serve the hot tofu to each other, a practice for those who know each other well, it warms her from the inside out, making her feel as happy as if they were a married couple. The most wonderful part of the dish, she finds, was the sauce, which had the perfect tanginess and a fruity aroma. The sauce soaked into the otherwise bland tofu, bringing out its natural sweetness and enhancing its flavor even more. Adding chili or daikon created even more layers of flavor, bringing out a new appeal with every single bite. Orius closes her eyes in bliss, thinking what an exquisite dish it is to have in the cold. Through the shared act of eating the yudofu, their conversation began to flow naturally. The moment felt so comforting and happy that she completely forgot she was on a battlefield, simply savoring the brief moment of peace. Observing them, Shuri gave them a gentle push, an encouragement so that her feelings could finally reach Gungrave. Gungrave looks at a blushing Orius in disbelief, uttering her name as she shyly confirms his unspoken question with a yes. As Shuri watches from the tense entrance, Orius closes her eyes in blissful relief, crying softly as she realizes her feelings, held for so long, have finally reached him. A quiet moment passes between Orius and Gungrave as they look at each other. Gungrave takes her hands and asks her to listen to him, his expression serious. Looking directly into her eyes, he declares with wide-eyed sincerity that he loves her too. Orius is overcome with tears of joy, proclaiming that this is a wonderful day, the most joyful she has ever had. But Gungrave's expression shifts, and he tells her that despite his feelings, he can't be her lover, not right now. He explains grimly that tomorrow he might die in battle. He elaborates that as a mercenary he never knows when he might die, whether it's the next day, the day after, or the week after that. Orius turns to leave, pleading for him to stop, but he grabs her arm, insisting that she listen to him. He pulls her close, his grip firm on her shoulder as he looks at her intensely and tells her that he has a dream. She looks up at him with teary eyes, realizing he is talking about the country he always said he would build. His dream, he reminds her, is to build a nation of happiness, a place where no one goes hungry and no one lives in poverty. Gungrave vehemently declares that this is their nation, and while he doesn't know when he'll die, he absolutely will not die until he fulfills his dream. He then asks Orius if, when he finally gains a country of his own, she will let him be the one to propose to her. Tears stream down Orius's face as she looks up at him, calling him a coward for making such a promise. Despite her words, a gentle, tearful smile spreads across her face as she accepts his vow. She asks if she can really believe him, and he promises to become a king worthy of her. He gently cups her face, leaning in close. They share a deep and heartfelt kiss. Pulling back, Gungrave calls the kiss his vow, the best he can do for now, and Orius tearfully agrees. Suddenly, their comrades burst from hiding, shouting, "Congratulations!" The couple is completely stunned by the sudden intrusion. Their friends start teasing them, saying they are burning hot, and that they finally got together. The congratulations continue from the rest of the group, all with warm smiles. Orius and Gungrave ask in unison how long they've been there, and they learn their friends were watching from the very beginning, complaining about how tough it was to see them eat delicious, warm food in the cold. Orius covers her face, completely overwhelmed with embarrassment. Afterwards, she and Gungrave are relentlessly teased and made fun of by their childhood friends. Yet despite the teasing, it was an embarrassingly happy time as they were blessed by their friends. The couple stands together, surrounded by their smiling comrades. Orius closes her eyes with a peaceful smile, thinking that at last she is able to stand proudly beside Gungrave, and she silently thanks Shuri. The scene shifts to the snowy mountains the next day. Orius finds Shuri and expresses her gratitude, telling him that her feelings connected with Gungrave's. After she thanks him, Shuri suddenly starts hitting himself for some reason, which a startled Orius interprets as his way of blessing them. Orius then comments on his vast knowledge, and he explains he learned many things in his hometown since he was a child. Her interest is piqued by something he mentioned before, and she asks him what the tiny umami found in kelp is, wondering if it's too small to see. Standing in the snow, Shuri explains that everything in the world is made up of tiny particles, leaving her to question the terms atoms and molecules. He uses fire as an example, explaining that to create it, one needs combustible material, heat, and oxygen from the air. He states that these tiny, unseen things bind together to make up the entire world. And through magic, mages are able to manipulate those tiny particles and interfere with the very structure of the world. Orius floats in the air, realizing that this explanation might be the source of the vague doubts and unease she had been feeling about magic. As lightning seems to flash in her mind's eye, it feels as though the answers to all her questions have been presented right before her. The knowledge Shuri possesses, of atoms, molecules, science, and chemistry, is the closest thing to the truth of this world. Though he may be humble about it, his knowledge is still far beyond anything she knows. She briefly wonders who he really is but quickly decides against it. She resolves not to pry unnecessarily anymore, accepting him simply as a benefactor and a comrade. The army marches forward into a raging blizzard. Gungrave shields his eyes, noting that the snowstorm is bad, and Aureus agrees. They observe the enemy forces, who are used to fighting in these snowy conditions, meaning a tough battle is unavoidable. Aureus steps forward and tells Gungrave that she will clear the way. She walks ahead of the army line, facing the snowy expanse alone. Closing her eyes, she spreads her magic, and a vast amount of information floods her mind. She can see what the air, ground, snow, and people are made of, and now all that's left is to interfere with it. Following Shuri's lesson, she generates heat and continuously supplies oxygen with her magic, using the magic itself as fuel to amplify the power into a massive, expanding fireball. The enemy soldiers stare in disbelief, questioning if it's even magic and exclaiming that it's practically a sun. Even her comrades are stunned, remarking on the massive fireball and overwhelming heat, with one saying she's never heard of such a thing even in stories. As the fireball rages, all the mercenaries create a wall of air to shield themselves from the heat. The enemy soldiers cry out as the snow melts before their eyes, complaining that it's burning hot and they can't fight in their heavy gear. Aureus unleashes her powerful magic. She turns to Gungrave, who looks on with a confident smirk, and tells him the enemy's advantage is now gone and that it's time to go. Gungrave roars the order to charge, leading his forces into the fray. The battle that followed was completely one-sided, as her comrades were able to fully unleash their strength. Her own magic now displayed astonishing precision and power, allowing her comrades to fight at their full potential. The battlefield is left littered with the bodies of the fallen enemy soldiers. After the battle, her followers approach her in awe, asking what happened to her as her fireball and wind blades made her seem like a completely different captain. Aureus simply smiles and puts a finger to her lips, agreeing that they're right. She then winks playfully, stating that she merely attained the truth from Tofu. The narrative shifts to the history of the Age of Dark Wars, a time when mages were revered like heroes and exceptional ones were sought by every nation. In that era, one woman stood at the pinnacle of all mages. She was a mage capable of summoning the sun on the battlefield by attaining the truth, a depth of magic modern mages can't reach. Her name was Aureus Apurata, and she was known as the Witch of Truth. She became queen to the first continental king, Gungrave Apurata, and her achievements extended beyond military victories, with her most celebrated legacy being that she shared the truth with the world. A prime example was her founding of the National Academy for Mages, where she served as its first director and dedicated herself to educating future mages. It was she who laid the foundation for the word mage to become a title for the proud defenders of the kingdom. She was also renowned for her unmatched beauty, turning heads wherever she went and rejecting countless confessions of love. And yet, the only person she ever loved throughout her entire life was King Gungrave, a testament to her devotion and sincerity. 3 of her followers from the war became known as the Three Sages and carried on running the academy, yet even now, no one but Queen Aureus has ever reached the truth, showing her knowledge was beyond comprehension. When speaking of the truth, Queen Aureus once left behind a hint to reach its depths, saying a single dish held the key. That dish was made by a single cook and is today considered a traditional winter meal in the unified kingdom. It is a simple dish of kelp and tofu simmered together. She loved tofu and ate the dish regularly. And every time she ate it, she would say that this yudofu is filled with the knowledge of the truth. Misfortune appears poised to strike without warning as Shuri and a companion look toward the horizon. Following their victory in the snowy plains, the Gungrave Mercenary Corps is currently on the move, traveling from the north towards the south. They travel by horse and carriage, aware that suspicious rumors are coming from the south in a continent known for its shady stories. Gungrave notices Shuri looking unwell and asks if he is okay, a question that seems to annoy the sickly Shuri. Riding alongside the supply wagon, Gungrave observes that Shuri does not look well at all. As the wooden wheels of the carriage clatter, Shuri admits the ride is not comfortable and that he continues to feel sick. The carriage hits a particularly rough bump, jolting its occupants. The sudden lurch worsens Shuri's nausea, and he quickly covers his mouth. None. A companion tells him not to throw up as Shuri apologizes, complaining that the carriage's lack of suspension, bearings, or rubber tires is killing his butt and inner ears. Gungrave tells Shuri this is why he should get used to riding horses, explaining that training on horseback would lessen his motion sickness. Shuri laments that it's not a matter of getting used to horses. Rather, the horses can't get used to him, as they tend to dislike him, throw him off, and even try to kick him. Another mercenary remarks that's just how Shuri is, while Gungrave notes with exasperation that Shuri never loses his laid-back attitude even when feeling terrible. The conversation turns to Lil, with someone asking why she doesn't ride horses either. Lil states with a glare that her feet don't reach the stirrups, prompting a quick apology for bringing it up. Shuri observes that Lil has recently gotten tattoos on her arms and legs, which are apparently part of some unusual research she is conducting. He understands from her previous explanation that they are magic runes, but he still wonders if it's okay for her to mark up her beautiful skin like that. Suddenly, Lil's vision begins to wobble, causing her and Gungrave to become alarmed. Gungrave shouts at Shuri, asking what's wrong as Lil reaches out a hand to stop him. The commotion draws the attention of the others, who call out Shuri's name in alarm, asking what is wrong with him. Shuri collapses, shouting for the carriage to stop as his body feels heavy and cold while his head is burning, leaving him sick and unable to move. The mercenary group makes a hasty camp, setting up tents among the trees. Shuri introduces himself from his sickbed, stating that he is currently down with poor health. He explains that he caught a cold, likely due to the fatigue from travel and the drastic temperature change from a cold region to a warm one. Though he is the cook, he is taking a break, and while he worries about everyone's meals, a voice tells him not to say stupid things and to just rest. Gungrave and Ms. Kaguya stand by his bedside. Shuri is currently receiving treatment in a tent at the hastily set up campsite, feeling terrible for delaying the entire unit. Ms. Kaguya has medical knowledge, but she isn't using spells. Instead, she conducts a physical exam and prescribes medicine, practicing a form of traditional Eastern medicine that includes moxibustion and acupuncture. Ms. Kaguya is a prodigy who mastered medicine at a young age and is said to even conduct intelligence missions in enemy territory while posing as a doctor. After finishing her initial first aid and acupuncture, Kaguya confirms that it's likely a cold but warns that they must be careful since they can't rely on proper medicine or nutrition at the moment. She turns to leave, telling Shuri to be extremely careful. Lying in bed, Shuri berates himself for being a hopeless case, feeling that managing one's health is a basic responsibility and that he has troubled everyone by catching a cold. Gungrave apologizes to Shuri, saying it's his own fault for not hiring an assistant sooner and for neglecting to stock up on medicine. Shuri insists that it wouldn't have happened if he had just taken better care of his own health. Gungrave refutes this, stating it is his responsibility as the one in charge, while Shuri thinks to himself that being relied on actually makes him happy. More importantly, Shuri asks Gungrave how everyone else is and if they are eating properly. Gungrave reassures him that everyone is fine, and while Shuri dismisses it as an exaggeration, Gungrave insists he is still the best and that everyone is hoping for his recovery. Gungrave adds that he is not exaggerating, as Kaguya could only provide emergency care and they really need proper medicine, fearing what might happen if something went wrong. Shuri resolves that he won't die so easily from a cold after coming to another world, as he still has the goal of returning to Earth. Gungrave tells him that everyone wanted to rush in and take care of him, and that he believes in him. He knows Shuri will recover because he has all of his comrades there for him, as the concerned faces of the mercenary group are shown. A blushing Shuri laughs weakly and asks Gungrave to please thank them for him. Gungrave agrees and tells him to just rest for now before leaving the tent. Looking around, Shuri sees that his cooking tools and ingredients have been placed in the tent with him, guessing that his friends are hoping he'll be able to cook for himself. Deciding that he might as well use them since they're here, he gets up to prepare something. He takes out eggs, sake, and honey that he had bought at a village they stopped at previously. He begins by lighting the stove to boil water and heat the sake, and while that's happening, he thoroughly mixes the egg and honey. Once the sake is warm, he combines it with the egg mixture and then strains it into a cup. With the final step complete, the egg sake is done. He takes a sip but finds it troubling that he can barely taste anything due to his cold. Believing this won't do, he decides to just drink it for the nutrients and then go back to sleep. Lying in bed, this experience reminds him of when he was sick back home. His mom would make ginger porridge while his dad made egg sake. Back then, worried friends would check in on him, but now, he doesn't have any of that. He is alone with no mom, no dad, no family, no friends, and no doctor by his side. Weakened by the cold, all sorts of thoughts swirl in his head as he reflects on having no one at all. It has been several months since he came to this world, and there is no guarantee that time flows the same here as it does on Earth. He might go back only to find hundreds of years have passed. He hasn't even found a way to return in the first place, leaving him to wonder how he would even get back. Lying alone in the tent, sick and isolated, he weakly calls out for his mom and dad. When people are at their weakest, they end up saying such things, a small voice thinking that just once would be enough. Lying in his sickbed, sweating from the fever, he wishes he could see his mom and dad. Night falls over the quiet mercenary camp, its tents illuminated by the stars. A person stretches their arms with a great yawn. Shuri sits up in his cot, realizing that it's already pitch dark outside and he must have fallen asleep at some point. He stretches his arms and feels much better, crediting either Kagaya-san's acupuncture or the egg sake he made for his recovery. As he moves around, he suddenly feels the urgent need to relieve himself and dashes out of the tent. After stepping into the woods for a moment, he returns feeling much better. He notices how quiet the camp is, assuming everyone must be asleep already, but a strange light catches his attention. He spots Teg-san standing guard near his tent, which surprises them both. Shuri wonders what Teg-san is doing near his tent so late at night. He briefly imagines a hellish scenario before dismissing it, reasoning that it's far too late for a simple get-well visit. Shuri approaches and asks what's going on, and Teg-san explains that he was just a little worried about how he was doing. He was concerned that Shuri's condition might have gotten worse or that he was unable to sleep. Shuri is touched that Teg-san was worried about him, though he feels it's an overreaction for just a cold, a thought he knows he shouldn't say out loud. He then understands why they are so concerned. For the people of this world, a common cold is seen as the root of all illness, a gateway to something far worse. Feeling pathetic, Shuri apologizes for making Teg-san worry and states that he has recovered enough to move around, though he knows it must be frustrating for the team to be held up by someone who can't even fight. He wipes sweat from his brow and says that starting tomorrow he should be able to work again. Teg-san grows angry, asking if Shuri really thinks he came here in the middle of the night just to tell him to hurry up and get back to work. He pushes Shuri back toward his bed, telling him to quit saying nonsense and go to sleep. He firmly tucks Shuri into his cot, patting the blanket down. Shuri apologizes, guessing he said something dumb, but Teg-san clarifies that he's not mad, just exasperated, which Shuri thinks is pretty much the definition of being mad. Teg-san sits down and says that if anything, they are the ones who should be apologizing, as the real issue is that Shuri has been supporting all of them while none of them have been supporting him. The two of them look at each other in the quiet tent. Teg-san then asks Shuri to tell him if he wants to go back to his hometown to see the people who supported him there. Shuri sits up and admits that of course he wants to see his family and go home. Teg-san correctly figures that despite wanting to, Shuri can't go back. Teg recalls that Shuri is from outside the outer sea, but Shuri says that's not quite it, wondering internally if it's okay to keep hiding the truth forever. Pondering for a moment, Teg-san says that unlike them, who have never had parents, Shuri has a home and family waiting for him. Shuri is taken aback, realizing that Gungrave and the others are orphans who started the mercenary group with their childhood friends. Feeling thoughtless for talking about family in front of someone like that, he apologizes, but Teg-san tells him to listen. He explains with a proud smile that while it's true they don't have parents, all of the childhood friends in the group think of each other as family. He continues that they don't need any half-baked sympathy, and though Shuri might not be able to go back, his situation is different, remarking on the idea of a family beyond the continent. The idea of crossing the sea to return home is something Teg-san had never even considered until now. Shuri feels it's now too late and too hard to explain that he's from another world. If Shuri is feeling okay physically and mentally, Teg-san asks if he would tell him about his family. He admits he has always wanted to hear what a family is like from someone who actually has one. Shuri sees that Teg-san is being completely serious. And so, Shuri began to speak. He describes what it's like to eat a meal with his parents and how the simple, welcome home, after playing with friends has become a precious memory. He talks about how living alone after leaving home made him realize just how much he appreciated his parents. He ended up talking about these kinds of things for quite a while, and he realized that putting it into words only made his feelings for his family and Earth grow stronger. But the more he talks, the more he starts to wonder what this place has really become to him, as he still has no way to return home. In the past few months, he has worked with his life on the line, witnessed people die in battle, and raised a toast with those who survived. He has shared meals and drinks with his comrades, celebrated victories, and comforted them when things went wrong. He realizes with a start that even these ordinary days have quietly become something irreplaceable to him. As this realization dawns on him, a tear begins to stream down his face. Tae-san notices his sudden emotion and calls out his name in concern. Wiping his eyes, Shuri quickly insists that it's nothing at all. Tae-san looks at him with a sad expression, saying that a kind person like Shuri shouldn't be in a blood-soaked place like this and would be better off with his family. With his face hidden by shadows, Shuri insists that's not true, that he wants to go home, but there's something else. He reflects that if he really wanted to go back no matter what, he would have left the mercenary corps and acted on his own. The reason he didn't wasn't just a lack of initiative. With tears now flowing freely, he finally realizes that this place has become an irreplaceable home for him. He felt comfortable here and he just wanted to stay with everyone. Being here with all of them makes him truly happy, and he has no intention of leaving without repaying the kindness he's received. He pleads with Tae-san to let him stay and keep working here. He bows his head deeply, begging him. Tae-san smiles warmly, telling him it's a waste for only him to hear such a heartfelt speech and that he should say it in front of everyone. Tae-san smiles warmly, telling Shuri that he has always been, and always will be, their comrade, and they should keep looking out for each other from now on, to which Shuri happily agrees. Changing the subject, Tae-san notes that Shuri is looking a lot better. Shuri agrees with a cheerful expression, confirming that he does feel much better. Feeling recovered, he turns to Tae-san and says he is thinking of making a late-night meal. Tae-san prepares to leave, but Shuri stops him and asks if he would eat with him. Shuri explains that the dish is tied to his memories, so he would be grateful to have someone share it with him. Among the ingredients left by his bedside was a homemade consommé stock that he had created after much trial and error. He had made the consommé by drying vegetables, grinding them finely, and then mixing the powder with necessary spices. To make the dish, the ingredients needed are cabbage, carrot, potato, onion, and sausages, along with water, consommé, salt, and pepper. The preparation begins by peeling the potatoes and cutting them into 3 or 4 pieces, then cutting the carrots into 4-centimeter lengths and quartering them. Next, the onion and cabbage are cut into eighths, in wedges, and small cuts are made in the sausages so the flavor can seep in better. Water and consommé stock are put into a pot, and once heated, the carrots and potatoes are added. After they soften, the remaining ingredients are added to simmer gently over low heat. When everything is cooked through, the dish is seasoned with salt and pepper, and the pot au feu is complete. Shuri offers the finished meal to Tae-san, telling him to go ahead and dig in. Tae-san closes his eyes and inhales deeply, remarking that it smells amazing as the aroma of spices and ingredients drifts into his nose. He notes that consommé soup is a refined dish, taking the best flavors from its ingredients to create an excellent flavor, a wonderful aroma, and a smooth aftertaste. Shuri explains that this particular dish is called pot au feu, and Tae-san, noticing the sausages, asks if they are what he thinks they are. He then remarks on the potatoes, acknowledging that while he knows the potatoes in Shuri's cooking are always delicious, he is still surprised. This is because potatoes are a common crop that show up in meals so often that a lot of people get tired of eating them. Shuri smiles, telling Tae-san that in this dish, the potatoes are especially tasty, and Tae-san agrees that there's never been a bad dish from Shuri. Tae-san takes a thoughtful bite of the potato. He declares the dish is fine, with delicious potatoes and tender carrots, but more than anything he is impressed by the juices from the sausage. He continues to praise the soup, which has a wonderful aroma and a gentle flavor that is simultaneously rich. He admits that his palate probably isn't refined enough to understand it fully, but he can tell it's a really good dish, with the flavor-soaked potatoes being in a class of their own. Shuri looks at the bowl of pot au feu, agreeing with Tae-san's praise but quietly noting that he still hasn't caught up to the taste of home yet. He then explains to a surprised Tae-san that this was a dish his family used to make for him. He felt a little nostalgic, so he decided to make it, and while his feeling of wanting to stay with the group is genuine, he admits with a sad smile that he still feels a little lonely. Tae-san suddenly grabs Shuri, shouting that they are orphans who don't even know their parents' faces, and the only faces they've ever known are those of their childhood friends. He yells that they all see each other as comrades and as family. He asks Shuri if he has forgotten that he has always been, and always will be, one of them, part of their family. Within the comrades and family that they hold dear, Shuri is there too. He tells Shuri that if he ever feels lonely, he wants him to lean on them, because they are a family bound together, sharing the same fate. Shuri is stunned into silence, thinking that he has been incredibly fortunate. Tears well up in his eyes as he realizes that someone like him, who just suddenly appeared a few months ago, was accepted as a comrade, and he thanks Tae-san. Teg-san tells him they will definitely protect him, because they want him to be their place to return to. He explains that if they think of Shuri's cooking waiting for them, they feel strength welling up and believe they can survive no matter what. He adds that they're the ones who should be thanking Shuri, because his warm, delicious, and comforting food is like the meals they imagine parents would have made for them. That night, something truly wonderful happened, and Shuri realized he had gained irreplaceable friends who call him a comrade and even family. The next day, a bright and cheerful Shuri greets everyone good morning. The other unit members are shocked and overjoyed to see him back on his feet, calling it a miracle. Everyone in the unit expresses their relief and happiness at his full recovery, telling him they were worried sick and would be in real trouble without him. Two of them fret over who would make Captain Lil's Hamburg steaks, which causes Shuri to collapse in exasperation. That's what they were worried about. Surrounded by their laughter, Shuri smiles, thinking to himself that this place really feels comfortable. Looking back, Shuri realizes that it was at this moment that he made up his mind. Deep down, he had already chosen his answer but lacked the confidence to embrace it. He thinks of his parents, telling them that he doesn't think he will ever return to their side. He has found a new purpose in life and wants to follow that path. In this world he first laid eyes on, he wants to give his all to what he can do. He silently wishes for everyone back home to stay well, reassuring them that he is living happily so there's no need to worry. He also gives a silent thank you to Teg-san. He reflects that Teg-san always lightens the mood with his playful attitude, but he never laughed off Shuri's words, accepting them with sincerity. From the day Shuri recovered, Teg-san began taking his training seriously and has been growing unbelievably strong. Shuri knows that deep down, that person is incredibly kind and truly strong. A younger mercenary approaches Captain Teg in a forest clearing. He asks Teg a quick question about how to use a bow, catching the captain by surprise. Teg dismisses the request, claiming he isn't the sort of person who teaches others and suggests the mercenary ask the vice captain instead before heading off. The young mercenary and his companions are left looking confused by their captain's behavior. Teg reflects that he has never made decisions on his own, admitting he has always been bad at thinking things through and drawing his own conclusions. Even when Gungrave decided to form a mercenary band, Teg's only thought was that it was fine as long as he could make a living. He always just goes with the flow instead of making his own choices, and even in battle, he rarely takes command, leaving it to his adjutant while he just keeps shooting enemies. That is how he lives, always choosing the easy way while following others. He introduces himself as Teg, the captain of the archer unit. He only started using a bow because Gungrave told him to consider the unit's composition, but fortunately, he discovered he had a talent for it and now prides himself on being a pillar of their combat strength. But there is one thing he regrets, a bitter memory that still haunts him in his nightmares. In a flashback, a group of mercenaries anxiously awaits the return of the cavalry, with one lamenting that if he had been by Gungrave's side, this wouldn't have happened. One of them grabs a young Teg, angrily demanding to know why he left Gungrave behind and ran away. As Teg stammers, unable to answer, another mercenary announces that the cavalry has returned. The returning soldiers are carrying a wounded Gungrave, shouting that the captain has been taken down and to get Lady Kaguya immediately. The sight of his fallen leader leaves Teg completely shattered and speechless. The memory is from a time in the past when the band had to retreat after losing a battle, and the group watched in horror as Gungrave was carried away. During that battle, with Kuga's and Altros's units operating separately, Commander Gungrave's cavalry had no choice but to hold the rear, and he was gravely wounded. At that time, because he wasn't specifically ordered or entrusted to stay, Teg just went along with the flow and ran, leaving Gungrave behind as he fled. The image of his gravely injured leader being carried on a stretcher is seared into his memory. Thanks to Kaguya, a town doctor, and everyone's devoted care, Gungrave barely survived, and because of his bravery, the band's reputation rose. But Teg sometimes thinks that if his archer unit had joined the rearguard mission, the whole situation could have been avoided. It was because of this past failure that he swore an oath. He vowed that this time, he would be the one to protect them, because everyone in the band is his family. But he feels he still hasn't been able to overcome his tendency to just go with the flow, and so his oath remains unfulfilled. It was then that Gungrave brought a new man into the company. This man was a scrawny cook named Shuri Azuma, who looked like he could never make it as a mercenary, but Teg has learned that the underestimated ones often have incredible skills. Thanks to Shuri, mealtime has become joyful and blissful, with his unbelievably delicious and charming dishes. When they win a battle and eat Shuri's food, Teg feels it's good to be alive and is truly glad that he survived. At the same time, seeing Shuri effortlessly support the group with his cooking frustrated Teg a little. He realized the one truly protecting the family he thought was his was Shuri, working from behind the scenes with his incredibly tasty meals. He notes that core members like Lil, Kuga, and Orius have all changed after eating Shuri's cooking. Altros, Asajai, and Kagaya have also started acknowledging Shuri, and of course, Teg had also begun to feel that he was a comrade. But it was just then that Shuri collapsed. The memory of the sudden chaos returns, with everyone rushing to the wagon and calling Shuri's name. Orius immediately took command, ordering Gungrave to have the men stay put while Kagaya prepared for treatment and everyone else set up the tents. The mercenaries cleared a path, carrying Shuri on a makeshift stretcher while asking if the bedding was ready. Teg recalls looking on with concern as the unconscious Shuri was carried past him. He remembers the pained look on Shuri's face as he weakly apologized. As the mercenary band resumed its march, Teg finally took the time to think about it and realized something. He came to understand that Shuri isn't weak, but rather skilled at enduring the burdens placed upon him, like all the cooking in the cold region, and hiding his own struggles. And yet, after all that, the only thing Shuri said was, "I'm sorry." Teg finally realized that they had been relying too much on Shuri's kindness, never noticing that he never once blamed them for dumping all the trouble on him. He thinks of his past failure, watching Gungrave get carried away on a stretcher. His thoughts return to the present, in the quiet of the camp at night, with a voice saying it's most likely just a cold. Kagaya's diagnosis was indeed a cold, but Teg has learned that a cold is a troublesome illness for the poor. The wealthy can see a doctor and get treated, but if treatment is delayed for the poor, it can lead to serious complications, so rich people don't die from colds. Poor people, however, do, which is why they were right to call it a poverty killer. Gungrave emerges from Shuri's tent, pulling the flap closed behind him. Teg asks how Shuri is doing, and Gungrave replies that for now, there's nothing to worry about, though he laments that if they'd had medicine, it wouldn't have come to this. Gungrave blames himself, admitting he relied entirely on Shuri and took him for granted, failing to consider his needs and repaying his kindness with betrayal. Teg sits silently, listening to his commander's words. He reflects that he is the same, that far from worrying about Shuri's health, he even found helping him a bother at times. He overhears Shuri's feverish murmurs, calling out for his father and mother. It was obvious from those words. Shuri has a family and has been working hard and fighting to survive so he could one day reunite with them. Teg can only imagine how anxious and helpless Shuri must have felt, never voicing his loneliness. He asks himself if they ever tried to understand Shuri's pain, his worries, or what his family is even like. He concludes with shame that they know nothing about him, because they never even tried to ask.